The electronic wail of a code-pink infant abduction drill pulsed through the maternity ward corridors. The sound was designed by hospital administration to induce immediate high-alert status. It failed to alter my resting heart rate. I sat upright in the sterile hospital bed. The sharp scent of iodine and antiseptic clung to the crisp white sheets draped over my legs. A warm, heavy weight rested against my chest. My newborn daughter was asleep, oblivious to the engineered chaos in the hallway. The rhythmic beep of the medical monitor tracking my vitals provided a steady, unbothered baseline rhythm. At the foot of my mattress stood my older sister, Savannah. The crisp rustle of her designer trench coat created a frantic counter-rhythm to the medical machinery. Her face was twisted into a mask of manufactured entitlement. She pointed a manicured finger in my direction, her voice climbing an octave as she addressed the man lingering near the doorway. "She is experiencing a postpartum delusion, Bennett." Savannah insisted her tone, demanding immediate compliance. "The hormones are making her confused. Tell her to hand over our baby right now before she does something dangerous." Beside Savannah stood our parents, Helen and Richard. They functioned as her silent enforcers. Helen gripped her leather purse, her knuckles showing stark white under the fluorescent bulbs. She offered a tight, trembling nod, endorsing the attempted medical theft to preserve her favorite daughter and her illusion. Bennett hovered near the threshold. His posture radiated bewildered hesitation. He looked at his wife and then at me, unable to reconcile the reality of a woman holding her own child with the elaborate surrogacy narrative he had been fed for 9 months. Savannah took a definitive step forward. She reached her arms toward the clear plastic bassinet resting near my bed. I did not shrink back against the pillows. I did not pull my daughter away or scream for hospital security to intervene. Confrontation without leverage yields zero return on investment. A data privacy auditor does not react to an unauthorized access attempt with hysteria. You do not argue with a corrupted user. You simply trigger the security protocol. I reached over and pressed the red call button pinned to my pillowcase. The charge nurse stepped through the doorway a moment later, her eyes scanning the crowded room, assessing the friction. I bypassed Savannah entirely. I looked at the nurse and delivered a calm, clinical instruction. "Please verify the biometric security protocol on the patient bracelet. The timeline requires a brief pause right here." Before the nurse scans the barcode and reads the digital data that will permanently liquidate my sister and her marriage, we need to review the data trail. Welcome back to Aura Vengeance, where we sit in the dark with the secrets families try to bury, then turn on the lights to reveal the truth. I am Eliana Alexander. I am 33 years old. Drop your age in the comments below so I know who is listening tonight, and be sure to subscribe. I secure sensitive medical records for a regional healthcare network. I spend my days identifying data leaks and neutralizing compliance liabilities. My family believed they could manipulate my biology to fund their own failing infrastructure. Savannah curated a pristine, affluent lifestyle on social media funded entirely by her husband. She assumed my lifelong habit of fixing her logistical messes would force my submission today. She believed she could walk into a modern maternity ward and walk out with my child to save her own failing facade. She failed to realize that when you attempt to steal a premium asset from an auditor, you authorize a full forensic accounting of your own survival. The fog rolling off Casco Bay carries a dense, clinging chill that settles over the Portland harbor long before the sun rises. I observe the gray vapor obscuring the coastline through the tempered glass of my third-floor office window. My environment requires unclouded visibility. I operate as a data privacy auditor for a prominent regional healthcare network. My daily operational mandate involves securing protected medical records, identifying vulnerabilities within our digital infrastructure, and neutralizing compliance liabilities before they trigger federal penalties. I do not deal in assumptions. I deal in encrypted facts. I hold a specialized USB authentication key in my right hand, turning the small metal device between my fingers. It grants me access to the most intimate, guarded details of human existence. Patient histories, diagnostic results, and surgical reports sit secured behind the digital firewalls I maintain. I apply this exact risk management methodology to my own family hierarchy. My older sister, Savannah, constructs her reality using a fundamentally different metric. She curates a pristine, affluent lifestyle designed exclusively for public consumption on social media platforms. Her digital footprint features meticulously posed photographs in designer clothing staged against the backdrop of upscale restaurants and exclusive private lounges. She funds this visual performance through her marriage to Bennett. He functions as a highly successful commercial developer, a career that requires him to travel constantly, inspecting properties across the eastern seaboard. His frequent absences provide Savannah with unchecked access to his capital and ample, unmonitored time to polish her fabricated persona. She prioritizes aesthetics over authenticity, preferring the illusion of success over the grueling labor required to earn it. Since childhood, my competence served as their unspoken administrative safety net. While Savannah cultivated her popularity, I calculated the logistics. When she overdrew her checking accounts or missed critical deadlines, my parents expected me to step in, balance the equations, and erase the deficit. They treated my structured efficiency as a communal resource. I functioned as the silent firewall, absorbing the friction of her chaotic vanity to prevent the entire family grid from suffering a systemic crash. I learned early that my labor was expected, while her performance was celebrated. The precedent for this unequal distribution of accountability solidified during my 6th grade academic year. I spent 3 weeks constructing a complex, functional model of a renewable energy circuit for the district science fair. I wired the components, painted the display board, and compiled a rigorous data log detailing the voltage output. It was a meticulous functioning prototype. The morning of the exhibition, I woke up to find my project missing from my bedroom desk. I located the model hours later, sitting on a display table in the middle school gymnasium. My carefully lettered nameplate had been peeled off the presentation board. In its place, Savannah had written her own name using a thick black marker. She stood beside my creation, smiling brightly for the judges, accepting praise for an intellectual achievement she did not engineer. She won the primary award. A crisp, shiny blue ribbon was pinned to the corner of the display. I stood near the bleachers, recognizing the theft. I approached our parents, expecting them to correct the fraudulent claim and restore my ownership. Helen and Richard did not confront their eldest daughter. They pulled me aside, their voices dropping into hushed, urgent tones. Helen gripped my shoulder, her fingers digging into the fabric of my sweater. She instructed me to stay quiet. She reasoned that Savannah needed the academic boost for her upcoming high school applications, while I possessed the inherent intelligence to simply build another project next year. Richard nodded in agreement, telling me to preserve the peace. They demanded I swallow the injustice to protect her fragile ego. They authorized the theft of my intellectual property, teaching Savannah that my creations were merely inventory, available for her to harvest. That afternoon, I watched her pin the stolen blue ribbon to her bedroom bulletin board. I stopped seeking their validation. I began maintaining my own internal ledger. My husband, Nolan, understands the mechanics of unseen pressure. He works as a senior meteorologist for the National Weather Service, analyzing barometric drops and atmospheric volatility. He tracks storms for a living. He is a quiet, observant partner who navigates the world with steady, undeniable logic. He refuses to participate in the performative rituals my parents demand. During our initial years of marriage, he watched Helen, Richard, and Savannah execute their relentless demands on my time and resources. Nolan often utilizes his professional terminology to describe my relatives. He notes that a hurricane looks incredibly peaceful in the eye, right before the eye wall shreds the foundation. The center of the storm presents a false, calm sky, tricking vulnerable targets into lowering their defenses. while the most destructive forces gathered just beyond the visible horizon. My family operated comfortably within that quiet eye, entirely oblivious to the impending collision. They assumed the structural integrity of our relationship would always bend to accommodate their entitlement. They failed to realize I was fortifying my own perimeter. 18 months ago, the parameters of my professional and personal life began to intersect. The healthcare network initiated a comprehensive security overhaul across all regional facilities. As the lead auditor, I supervised the deployment of the upgraded protocols. The administration prioritized the maternity and neonatal intensive care units, aiming to eliminate any theoretical risk of unauthorized patient access or infant abduction. We replaced the archaic keypad entries and standard identification badges with a state-of-the-art biometric security system. The new infrastructure relied on undeniable encrypted biological data. Upon delivery, the system generates a unique algorithmic barcode. One matching tag is secured to the mother wrist. The corresponding tag is fastened to the infant ankle. The automated doors securing the ward operate on a strict verification loop. To exit the secure perimeter or access restricted zones, the optical scanners require the simultaneous matching input of both barcodes. If the digital signatures do not align flawlessly, the magnetic locks freeze and the security desk receives an instant high-priority alert. Human error, forged paperwork, and verbal coercion cannot override the code. The system only respects the verified biological link. I appreciated the rigid, uncompromising nature of the biometric upgrade. It represented a boundary that could not be manipulated by guilt or tears. It offered a level of protection my parents never provided. I spent my days testing the scanners, ensuring the optical readers processed the encryption without latency. I fortified the hospital walls, creating a sanctuary where a mother and her child remained untouchable by external interference. While I secured the digital architecture of the maternity ward, Savannah began exhibiting a highly irregular shift in her own focus. Her social media channels typically featured imported leather goods and expensive brunch reservations. However, her online narrative started incorporating vague, dramatic references to maternal struggles. She began dropping heavy hints regarding her own supposed fertility issues, soliciting sympathy from her affluent followers. Her sudden obsession with reproduction felt performative, a new angle designed to harvest a different type of digital validation. The aesthetic pursuit of motherhood eventually pivoted into a targeted logistical inquiry. She began asking probing questions about my own physiological status. She wanted to know if Nolan and I were planning to expand our family unit. She inquired about my health insurance benefits and the specific coverage provided by my employer. She masked the interrogation as sisterly bonding, but an auditor recognizes a reconnaissance mission. She was gathering data points. I did not provide her with usable intelligence. I offered neutral, non-committal responses, restricting her access to my personal medical timeline. But withholding verbal information does not stop a determined adversary. If a hostile entity cannot acquire the necessary data through direct conversation, they will attempt to bypass the gatekeeper entirely. They will search for a backdoor into the system. I assumed my professional expertise insulated my private records from familial espionage. I believed the firewalls I built at the office naturally extended to my own encrypted patient files. That assumption proved to be a critical vulnerability. The hurricane was shifting direction, the eye wall tightening as it moved toward my sector. The first indicator of the impending breach would not arrive through a phone call or a tense family dinner. It would arrive as a silent digital alarm flashing across my workstation monitor, signaling that someone within my own bloodline was actively hunting for my most protected secrets. The first trimester of human gestation introduces a highly inefficient sequence of physiological variables. Fatigue and nausea operate as persistent, unpredictable disruptions to a standardized daily schedule. A data privacy auditor, however, does not allow biological friction to dictate operational capacity. I mitigated the physical symptoms, utilizing strict hydration protocols and a regimented focus on my corporate deliverables. I required a stable environment to process the internal changes. My third-floor office provided that necessary sanctuary. Outside the tempered glass window, the coastal Maine weather delivered a relentless barrage of freezing rain. The icy precipitation struck the pane with a sharp, rhythmic clicking. It sounded like thousands of tiny, frantic fingernails attempting to breach a reinforced perimeter. The gray, overcast sky cast a flat, unforgiving light across the harbor. Inside my workspace, the temperature remained a highly regulated 68 degrees. I sat at my dual-monitor workstation, reviewing a complex compliance audit for a newly acquired satellite clinic. The digital ledgers required meticulous verification to ensure no patient data remained exposed during the corporate transition. At 2:14 in the afternoon, a visual anomaly disrupted my primary screen. A stark red warning banner materialized across the top quadrant of the interface. In the realm of user interface design, color selection is never accidental. Red signifies a critical halt. It denotes an immediate active threat requiring instant administrative intervention. I paused my review of the satellite clinic and opened the security dashboard. The automated network defense system had flagged an unauthorized login attempt. The target of the intrusion was not a generalized hospital database or a random billing server. The hostile actor was attempting a brute force password attack directly against my personal digital patient portal. Someone was actively trying to shatter the encryption guarding my private obstetric records. I did not experience a surge of panic. A professional risk manager treats a security breach as a puzzle demanding immediate, factual resolution. Panic clouds judgment and delays the deployment of necessary countermeasures. I initiated a forensic trace on the digital footprint left behind by the intruder. The incoming request did not originate from an anonymous foreign server or a randomized proxy network designed to mask the user identity. The adversary operated with a profound, careless arrogance. I routed the Internet Protocol address through a standard geolocation database. The numbers mapped directly to a residential router located in an affluent coastal suburb just south of Portland. The coordinates corresponded flawlessly to the custom-built luxury home belonging to Bennett and Savannah. My older sister was attempting to harvest my protected medical data. I picked up my smartphone and navigated to my contact directory. I initiated a voice transmission. Savannah answered the connection on the third ring. Her tone projected the breezy, unbothered cadence of a woman whose greatest daily challenge involved selecting the optimal lighting for a curated social media update. I bypassed the standard familial pleasantries. I informed her that her local residential network had just registered a hostile intrusion against a federally protected healthcare database. The breezy cadence evaporated instantly. A brief, heavy silence transmitted over the cellular connection. Savannah realized her covert reconnaissance mission had triggered a tripwire. When she spoke again, her strategy shifted. She abandoned the carefree socialite persona and deployed a rehearsed defensive tactic. She feigned a profound, wounded maternal concern. "Eliana," she sighed, her voice dropping into a register of manufactured vulnerability. "You are being so clinical about this. I was not trying to hack you. I just wanted to log in and check on the baby developmental progress." She paused, ensuring the next sentence carried the maximum emotional weight. "You know how difficult my own fertility struggles have been. I feel so isolated watching you experience this milestone. I just wanted to see the ultrasound scans so I could feel involved in the journey." I processed the sheer mathematical absurdity of her excuse. Savannah utilized her supposed fertility issues as a form of social currency. She frequently posted vague, melancholy updates online, soliciting sympathy and validation from her affluent peers. Her narrative required her to be the tragic heroine. However, a legitimate desire to view a sonogram image prompts a phone call requesting a printed copy. It does not prompt a sustained, unauthorized cyber attack on a secure medical server. She was framing her digital espionage as an act of loving sisterly devotion, attempting to weaponize her own reproductive narrative to excuse a felony. Before I could articulate this glaring logic gap, the line clicked. A secondary caller merged into the active conversation. Helen. My mother possessed an uncanny predatory instinct for materializing the exact moment her favored child required a human shield. She monitored the family dynamics like a sentry, always prepared to intercept any incoming fire directed at Savannah. Helen did not reprimand her eldest daughter for attempting to steal protected health information. She directed her focus entirely onto the victim of the breach. Her voice adopted a specific, cloying tone. It was a suffocating, synthetic sweetness engineered to guilt the target into immediate submission. It resembled the heavy, toxic perfume she wore, designed to mask the rot underneath. Eliana, darling Helen, cooed the syllables, dripping with forced affection. You know how difficult this season is for your sister. She possesses such a sensitive heart. She just wants to share in your joy. You should simply provide her with the login credentials. It would bring the family closer together during this special time. In the background of the audio feed, I heard the low, indistinct murmur of my father, Richard, offering his passive agreement. They functioned as a unified front, demanding I surrender my medical privacy to satisfy the vanity of their golden child. They viewed my biological data not as confidential personal information, but as a communal asset. They expected me to grant a proven thief unmonitored access to the vault simply to preserve the illusion of domestic harmony. A novice encountering this level of parental treason would engage the provocation. A vulnerable daughter would raise her vocal register, cite the stringent federal statutes regarding health insurance portability, and demand a sincere apology. I recognized that confrontation without leverage yields zero return on investment. Arguing with dedicated enablers only validates their perceived authority. It provides them with the emotional friction they require to cast the victim as the uncooperative villain. If I yelled, Helen would weep. Savannah would claim my hormones made me aggressive. The truth of the digital theft would be buried beneath a mountain of manufactured familial drama. I do not negotiate the terms of my own security, and I do not participate in theatrical performances. I will keep your recommendation under advisement. Helen, I replied, offering a neutral, meaningless sequence of words. I terminated the call before my mother could issue another syrupy mandate. I set the phone down on the smooth surface of my desk and turned my attention back to the workstation monitor. The stark red warning banner remained visible, a glowing digital testament to the unyielding toxicity of my bloodline. The freezing rain continued to strike the window pane, the sharp clicking sound providing a steady acoustic rhythm for my next operational phase. I did not share the password. I accessed the back-end administration tools for the patient portal. I initiated a comprehensive security protocol upgrade on my specific file. I eradicated the standard alphanumeric password requirement. I implemented a complex multi-factor authentication sequence. Any future login attempt would now require a dynamic biometric verification, routing a secondary randomized access code directly to a secure application on my personal device. I locked down the files, rendering the portal an impenetrable digital fortress. The perimeter was fortified against external manipulation. Securing the digital door, however, does not neutralize the physical threat standing on the porch. The unauthorized access attempt triggered my professional threat assessment protocols. Savannah possessed a life funded entirely by her husband, Bennett. She spent her days curating an illusion of effortless perfection, purchasing luxury goods to project a status she did not earn. An individual obsessed with superficial aesthetics and country club optics does not suddenly develop a burning academic desire to read clinical blood panel results or standard obstetric chart notes. She required specific proprietary data. A sister who attempts to breach medical privacy is not merely snooping out of idle curiosity. She is actively mapping a vulnerability. She is hunting for raw materials to construct a new architecture. A pregnant woman medical chart contains highly sensitive timelines. It details projected due dates, fetal measurements, blood types, and genetic screening results. Savannah was searching for the exact logistical parameters of my gestation. The intrusion indicated a fundamental shift in her operational strategy. She was no longer content with stealing middle school science fair projects or monopolizing our parents' attention during holiday dinners. She was targeting my biological timeline. She needed my medical data to sustain a narrative she was building outside of my immediate view. I closed the security dashboard and allowed the screen to return to its standard display. The initial boundary test provided critical intelligence. It confirmed that my family viewed my personal boundaries as temporary inconveniences waiting to be bypassed. It also confirmed that Savannah harbored a hidden high-stakes agenda regarding the impending birth of my daughter. The silent observation period officially commenced. I needed to let her believe her reconnaissance mission remained undetected. I needed to allow her to maneuver within the shadows so I could track her trajectory and identify her ultimate objective. I knew she would seek another avenue to extract the data she desired. I assumed she would attempt a more sophisticated digital exploit, or perhaps try to manipulate a weak link within the clinic administrative staff. I did not anticipate that her true strategy involved bypassing the digital realm entirely to forge a physical, legal reality. The true scope of her massive deception remained hidden, waiting to be uncovered in a forgotten, neglected corner of a shared family network. The coastal Maine winter establishes its presence long before the first significant snowfall. The temperature drops, presenting a dry, biting cold that seeps through the window panes and settles into the floorboards. I mitigate the chill, utilizing a small ceramic space heater positioned beneath my desk. The appliance produces a steady mechanical hum, functioning as a low, continuous acoustic baseline within my dark home study. The overhead fixtures remained switched off. The only illumination originated from the glowing screen of my laptop monitor, casting a pale blue light across my hands and the polished wood surface. To predict the trajectory of an adversary, an auditor must follow the data trail. The unauthorized intrusion against my digital patient portal provided the initial vector. Savannah attempted to breach a protected medical perimeter to harvest my biological timeline. A determined hostile actor does not gather intelligence without a designated storage facility. She required a repository to compile her fabricated narrative. Years ago, I configured a shared family cloud drive. The architecture was simple, designed to streamline digital photo sharing and organize recipes for my parents. Because I built the infrastructure, I retained the primary administrative credentials. I possessed the master key to the entire network. When someone living in your orbit attempts to steal your encrypted health records, you do not simply reinforce the locks and return to sleep. You trace their origin point and inspect their local directories. You verify what other covert operations they are currently running. I navigated the file hierarchy of the shared server. My eyes scanned the standard directories, viewing folders dedicated to holiday gatherings, and scanned tax receipts belonging to my father. The digital environment appeared mundane and entirely routine. Then my cursor hovered over a structural anomaly. A newly generated subdirectory sat nested within the main root folder. The file was flagged with a basic password protection protocol. The directory title read, Family Planning. The metadata indicated Savannah created the folder 3 weeks prior. A novice hacker relies on sophisticated cryptographic algorithms to secure their secrets. A lazy socialite relies on sheer predictability. Savannah lacked the technical discipline to generate a randomized alphanumeric code. She utilized her wedding anniversary date combined with the name of her purebred spaniel for every digital access point she owned. I inputted the anticipated sequence. The security prompt dissolved on the second attempt. The directory opened, revealing its contents. Inside the folder rested a single portable document format file. The title was vague, displaying only a string of numbers and the word agreement. I clicked the icon. The screen rendered a dense, multi-page legal contract. I read the header spanning the top margin. It was a gestational surrogacy agreement. My analytical brain processed the text, stripping away the legal boilerplate to isolate the core operational parameters. The document formally designated Savannah and her husband Bennett as the intended parents. It explicitly named me, Eliana Alexander, as the compensated gestational carrier. The subsequent pages outlined a comprehensive schedule of medical disbursements, milestone payments, and strict behavioral guidelines required during the pregnancy. Savannah was not merely seeking sympathy on social media by hinting at a fabricated fertility struggle. She was orchestrating a profound identity theft-level deception. She was telling her wealthy husband that my pregnancy was actually theirs. A lie of this magnitude requires a flawless logistical framework. Bennett is a highly successful commercial developer. He spends 3 weeks out of every month inspecting properties across the eastern seaboard, living in luxury hotels and airport lounges. He delegates his personal finances to a team of fiduciary managers who oversee his lucrative family trust. A trust fund requires verified legal documentation to release capital. Savannah could not simply print a fake contract at home and request a direct wire transfer from prudent lawyers. She needed a facilitator capable of bypassing the institutional gatekeepers. I dissected the footer of the contract to locate the architect of the fraud. She utilized a boutique fertility consultant based out of state. I ran a secondary query on the consultant agency. It was a corporate shell, a corrupt entity operating in the gray margins of reproductive law, catering to desperate, affluent clients. This specific consultant drafted the fake paperwork and established a dummy escrow account. They provided the necessary bureaucratic camouflage. The trust administrators reviewed the submission, saw the requisite official stamps, and funded the dummy escrow. The lawyers were completely unaware the designated surrogate was an unwitting victim. Savannah built a parallel reality, and she used an unscrupulous vendor to legitimize the illusion. I scrolled to the final page of the PDF to examine the authorization signatures. The visual evidence was stark and undeniable. A scanned high-resolution color copy of my main driver license sat embedded within the file. Savannah had stolen my physical identification card during a previous holiday visit, scanning the plastic and returning it before I noticed the temporary absence. Next to the stolen credential was the signature line. Someone had written my name in a sweeping, unnatural cursive utilizing bright blue ink. The forgery was glaring to anyone intimately familiar with my actual script. The loops were hesitant, the pressure uneven. It was the handwriting of a woman attempting to trace a foreign signature while battling her own adrenaline. However, the clumsy blue ink proved sufficient to fool a disinterested trust officer holding a digital copy hundreds of miles away. The severity of the situation crystallized in the quiet, dark study. My older sister was not engaging in a pathetic, delusional game of pretend to keep her absentee husband engaged. She was executing a highly structured, prosecutable federal crime. She committed identity theft and wire fraud. She was using my physical body and my biological reality as the collateral to secure a lucrative financial payout from her spouse's estate. I did not gasp. I did not experience a sudden spike in my pulse. I did not pick up my smartphone to call my parents and demand an immediate explanation. A data privacy auditor treats a discovered felony as the ultimate leverage. Confronting her in this moment would constitute a severe tactical error. If I revealed my discovery, she would instantly delete the cloud directory claim her computer was hacked and pivot into the role of the victim. I needed to preserve the chain of custody. I needed physical, undeniable proof. I routed the document to my local laser printer. The machine whirred to life in the corner of the room, breaking the acoustic baseline of the space heater. The mechanical rollers pulled crisp white paper through the toner cartridge. The pages emerged warm to the touch. I collated the printed contract, ensuring the forged blue ink signature and the stolen driver license copy were clearly visible on the final leaf. I walked over to my metal filing cabinet. I opened the bottom drawer and retrieved a sleek black presentation folder. The matte leather felt smooth and substantial in my hands. I slid the pristine pages inside the dark cover, securing the evidence. This folder represented the foundation of my countermeasure. It was a loaded weapon, waiting for the precise moment of deployment. I placed the black folder onto my desk. The discovery of the fraudulent contract answered the operational question of how she bypassed the trust lawyers. But an effective auditor must always calculate the ultimate objective. Why did Savannah need the funds routed to a dummy escrow account? Bennett funded her daily affluent lifestyle without hesitation, paying her credit card balances and her luxury vehicle lease. A woman does not commit federal wire fraud to purchase designer shoes or secure premium dinner reservations. She required a vast amount of liquid capital hidden entirely from her husband's oversight. She was purchasing an asset she could not justify to her financial providers. The investigation needed to transition from identifying the legal fraud to tracing the forensic accounting. I returned to my ergonomic chair and directed my attention back to the glowing monitor. I needed to map her public financial footprint to locate the destination of the stolen capital. The silent observation period was over. The active audit was officially online. The ceramic mug sitting on the edge of my desk had lost its thermal retention over the past hour. I reached for it, bringing the rim to my lips. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The bitter taste of cold coffee washed over my palate, providing a sharp grounding sensation that contrasted directly with the surreal nature of the forged document resting inside the black presentation folder. I swallowed the dark liquid, letting the caffeine sharpen my cognitive focus. A deception of this profound scale requires an equally substantial motive. My sister did not fabricate a surrogacy contract simply to garner fleeting sympathy on her social media channels. She did not risk federal identity theft merely to play a delusional game of pretend with her absentee husband. A forged signature on a legal instrument indicates a calculated pursuit of capital. Bennett operated as a highly successful commercial developer. He funded Savannah's visible lifestyle without apparent hesitation. She drove leased luxury vehicles, wore imported designer apparel, and dined at premium establishments. If she required standard currency to maintain her curated aesthetic, she merely utilized the high-limit credit accounts he provided. To orchestrate a covert complex fraud involving a dummy escrow and stolen medical data signaled a desperate need for off-book liquidity. She required a specific tangible asset she could not justify to his fiduciary managers. An effective auditor does not guess the destination of stolen funds. They trace the public footprint. I returned my hands to the keyboard. The rhythmic clicking of my mouse provided a steady acoustic bassline in the quiet, shadowed study, competing only with the low mechanical hum of the ceramic space heater positioned near my feet. I bypassed the standard consumer credit bureaus. I required hard municipal data. I navigated my browser to the centralized digital registry for the coastal counties of Maine. Real estate transactions are a matter of permanent public record, and individuals seeking to hide wealth frequently utilize property acquisitions to park their illicit capital. I initiated a targeted search, utilizing Savannah's legal name, filtering the parameters to encompass all residential transfers executed within the past 6 months. The municipal server processed the query. The spinning loading icon rotated for a fraction of a second before rendering a single, distinct result. I opened the digitized file. The stark black ink on the public property deed illuminated my monitor. The transaction had cleared the registry 45 days prior. The asset in question was a luxury vacation home situated on a coveted, secluded stretch of the southern Maine shoreline. The recorded purchase price indicated a highly lucrative acquisition. However, the glaring anomaly resided within the grantee designation. The deed listed Savannah as the sole exclusive owner. Bennett's name, his corporate holding companies, and his personal trusts were entirely absent from the legal instrument. She had purchased a premium coastal retreat entirely outside the purview of her marriage. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, piecing the ledger together. Bennett belonged to a lineage of generational wealth. His family trust operated under rigid, archaic stipulations designed to preserve the principal capital while incentivizing specific traditional milestones. I recalled a conversation from a previous holiday gathering where Bennett casually complained about the trust administrators and their strict protocols. He had explicitly mentioned that the trust provided generous, unencumbered disbursements for the arrival of biological heirs, including a specific provision to cover approved medical surrogacy expenses. The architecture of the deception crystallized with chilling mathematical clarity. Savannah did not fake a pregnancy out of a misguided desire for motherhood. She engineered the illusion to trigger that specific clause in the family trust. She utilized the corrupt boutique fertility consultant to generate the necessary medical and legal camouflage. They established the dummy escrow account to serve as a laundering mechanism. The trust administrators, viewing the forged signatures, the stolen copy of my driver's license, and the official-looking stamps, authorized the disbursement without initiating a secondary verification protocol. They wired $150,000 directly into the fraudulent escrow. Savannah embezzled the reproductive capital. She extracted the funds from the dummy account and utilized the stolen cash to secure the substantial down payment on her secret beachfront property. She converted my biological reality into her own real estate portfolio. The mechanics of the wire fraud were flawless, but a glaring logistical gap remained in the equation. $150,000 covers a premium down payment, but it does not satisfy the total valuation of a luxury coastal mortgage. The remainder of the balance requires strict underwriting from a recognized lending institution. Savannah possessed a credit profile ravaged by impulsive retail spending, high revolving balances, and a total lack of verifiable independent income. No prudent bank would underwrite a mortgage of that magnitude based solely on her fractured credentials. She required a guarantor. She needed someone with a lengthy, stable credit history and significant equity to absorb the risk of the loan. I guided my mouse back to the municipal portal. I clicked the secondary tab attached to the property record, pulling the specific mortgage lien filed alongside the new coastal deed. I scrolled past the dense legal boilerplate, the amortization schedules, and the interest rate disclosures. I targeted the final page, seeking the authorization signatures. 2 additional names sat inscribed beneath Savannah's sweeping cursive script: Helen and Richard, my parents. I stared at the glowing screen, the steady hum of the space heater fading into the background of my awareness. The puzzle was fully assembled, and the resulting image was devastating. My parents did not merely enable Savannah's vanity by demanding I share my digital passwords. They actively, legally co-signed her fraudulent real estate venture. To secure the loan approval for their favorite daughter, they leveraged their own modest retirement home. They utilized the equity they had spent 3 decades building to serve as the ultimate collateral for her secret beachfront mortgage. The financial tether bound them all to the crime. If Bennett discovered the missing trust disbursement, he would initiate a forensic audit of his own. He would uncover the dummy escrow, the forged surrogacy contract, and the stolen identity. He would freeze her access to his accounts, file for divorce, and demand immediate restitution. If Savannah lost her access to Bennett's daily capital, she would instantly default on the coastal mortgage. The lending institution would trigger their collection protocols. They would bypass Savannah and target the guarantors. The bank would foreclose on my parents' retirement home to cover the deficit. Helen and Richard were operating under the crushing silent weight of impending homelessness. Their sudden, intense hostility toward my boundaries was not driven by simple favoritism or a desire to keep the family connected. It was driven by raw, unadulterated terror. They needed my biological child to serve as the physical proof of the surrogacy. They required me to hand over my infant to maintain the illusion, pacify Bennett, and keep the trust fund disbursements flowing safely into Savannah's accounts. If the illusion shattered, they lost their shelter. They were willing to sacrifice my daughter to save their own roof. The situation had escalated far beyond a toxic family dispute. My relatives were engaged in a coordinated, prosecutable federal wire fraud scheme, and they viewed my body as the collateral required to balance their corrupted ledger. I locked my workstation and powered down the monitor. A data privacy auditor does not warn a hostile network that their intrusion has been detected. Warning them provides the adversary with the opportunity to destroy the evidence, alter their strategy, and construct a new perimeter. I needed to secure the target asset. The physical safety of my unborn child and the integrity of my medical data were paramount. The digital portal breach was merely their initial reconnaissance. The physical extraction attempt would inevitably occur within the walls of the hospital on the day of my delivery. I needed to construct an impenetrable fortress. I needed to weaponize the very medical institution they intended to infiltrate. The next operational phase required implementing a strict, undeniable medical firewall, ensuring that when my family arrived to claim their prize, they would encounter a barrier they lacked the clearance to breach. Discovering that my parents were financially tethered to a federal wire fraud scheme fundamentally altered the topography of my situation. They were not merely enabling a spoiled daughter. They were desperate hostages to a secret coastal mortgage, fighting to prevent the foreclosure of their own retirement home. They viewed my physical body and my unborn child as the necessary collateral to balance their corrupted ledger. A data privacy auditor does not wait for a hostile entity to breach the server before installing the firewall. You anticipate the intrusion, and you engineer an environment that renders the attack mathematically impossible. I refused to be a victim of a logistical hijack. The following morning, I arrived at the regional healthcare network an hour before my scheduled shift. I bypassed my third-floor office and navigated directly to the executive administrative suite on the ground floor. The corridors here smelled of floor wax and ozone, a sterile environment dedicated to institutional compliance. I approached the desk of the chief privacy officer. We operated as professional equals, having collaborated on numerous data security initiatives over the past 4 years. I did not offer a personal narrative or seek emotional validation. I presented a specific, undeniable logistical request. I required an immediate status upgrade to a high-security VIP patient profile. This specific classification is typically reserved for prominent local politicians, recognized public figures, or individuals facing active, credible threats. It removes the patient from the standard hospital directory. I justified the request utilizing internal threat metrics, citing a sophisticated, unauthorized access attempt against my digital portal. The privacy officer reviewed my documentation and nodded, recognizing the severity of an internal breach. I leaned forward and initiated the sharp, decisive click of my keyboard, utilizing a guest terminal to input the specific exclusion mandates. A standard password protocol is insufficient when dealing with a determined adversary who possesses intimate knowledge of your personal history. I implemented a complex multi-tier authentication sequence. I established a verbal passphrase required for any medical staff member to even acknowledge my presence in the facility. If an individual called the maternity ward or approached the reception desk inquiring about my status without providing the exact, randomized alphanumeric code, the hospital staff was legally bound to state that no patient by that name existed within the network. I did not stop at securing the digital search parameters. I drafted a physical exclusion manifest. I listed 3 specific names on the restricted access document: Savannah James Bennett, Helen Alexander, Richard Alexander. I designated them as hostile entities, explicitly banning them from receiving any diagnostic updates, viewing any medical charts, or gaining physical entry to the labor and delivery wing. The privacy officer printed the finalized addendum. She retrieved a heavy wooden-handled authenticating device from her top drawer. She pressed it onto an ink pad and brought it down against the thick paper. The heavy thud of the hospital administrator's stamp hitting the desk echoed in the quiet suite. The dark ink dried instantly, binding the hospital to a strict, unyielding legal contract. The silent, impenetrable medical firewall was officially constructed. I had weaponized the institution against the intruders, ensuring that when they inevitably arrived to claim their stolen prize, they would collide with a federal statute they could not manipulate. Securing the institutional perimeter, however, only solved one half of the equation. An adversary denied access to verifiable data will eventually become restless and unpredictable. If Savannah realized she was permanently locked out of my medical timeline, she might panic. She might hire an external investigator to shadow my movements or attempt to coerce a weak link in the clinic staff. I needed to control her anxiety. I needed to feed her a controlled substance. The opportunity to deploy a diversion arrived 3 days later. Savannah initiated a phone call, her voice tight with a manufactured urgency. She bypassed the standard pleasantries and launched into a grievance regarding my lack of transparency. She claimed Bennett was asking questions about the surrogate. She stated he was growing impatient, waiting for visual updates of the child he believed was his own. She demanded an ultrasound image, arguing that she needed tangible proof to placate her husband and keep the trust fund administrators satisfied. She attempted to frame the demand as a necessary business transaction, blaming the pressure on Bennett to mask her own desperate need for control. I recognized the maneuver. She was starving for intelligence. A starving predator is dangerous. A fed predator becomes lethargic. I did not argue with her. I did not point out the sheer audacity of demanding medical imaging to sustain a felony. Confrontation would only signal that my defenses were raised. I will provide the necessary documentation, I replied, keeping my vocal register smooth and entirely devoid of friction. I will meet you tomorrow afternoon. I terminated the connection and opened my secure laptop. I did not access my personal patient portal. I bypassed the regional healthcare network entirely and navigated to an open-source educational medical database. These archives are utilized by university programs to train resident physicians in diagnostic imaging. The database contains thousands of anonymous scans. I filtered the search parameters to locate a standard, healthy 20-week fetal sonogram. The image I selected was perfect in its banality. It displayed the distinct outline of a developing spine and a resting profile. Crucially, it contained zero identifying metadata. The digital file lacked a patient name, a clinic header, a medical record number, or a precise timestamp. It was a blank slate, a generic ghost. I routed the file to my high-resolution photo printer. The machine engaged, pulling a sheet of premium paper through the toner carriage. I retrieved the printout. The glossy, generic sonogram paper felt smooth and substantial in my hand. It looked entirely authentic to the untrained eye. It was a masterpiece of corrupted data. I slid the photograph into a plain white envelope, sealing the flap. The following afternoon, I met Savannah at a busy coffee shop located in a commercial plaza halfway between our respective residences. The environment was loud, filled with the hiss of espresso machines and the overlapping conversations of suburban commuters. It was a transactional space. She sat in a corner booth, wearing oversized designer sunglasses and tapping her manicured nails against the laminate tabletop. She projected the impatient aura of a superior waiting for a subordinate to deliver a requested report. I approached the booth and set the white envelope onto the table. I did not order a beverage. I did not sit down. Savannah snatched the envelope, tearing the seal open with eager, frantic fingers. She extracted the glossy paper and stared at the generic gray and black image. I watched her physiological response. The rigid, anxious tension gripping her shoulders dissolved. A slow, wide smile stretched across her face. The relief was palpable. She felt victorious. She traced her thumb over the printed image, projecting a twisted, proprietary affection toward a photograph of a stranger. "This is perfect," she murmured, her tone dripping with smug satisfaction. "Bennett will be so relieved. He just needs to feel connected to the process. You understand, do you not, Eliana? We just need to ensure everything proceeds smoothly." I offered a neutral, meaningless nod. She looked up at me, her eyes gleaming with unearned confidence. She assumed she had broken my resolve. She interpreted my prompt delivery of the sonogram as an act of submissive compliance. She believed she had successfully bullied me into funding her illusion. She placed the generic photograph back into her designer handbag, securing the brass clasp. She felt she controlled the timeline. She possessed the visual evidence required to string her husband along for another few months, ensuring the flow of trust fund capital remained uninterrupted. I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her to bask in the glow of her simulated triumph. The red herring had functioned flawlessly. I had handed her a useless piece of glossy paper, and she had swallowed it whole. By feeding her this fabricated intelligence, I engineered a profound tactical advantage. I bred blinding complacency in the enemy camp. Savannah believed she held the reins. When an arrogant individual believes they have conquered their opponent, they stop checking their blind spots. They stop searching for traps. They assume the final phase of their operation will unfold with the same frictionless ease. She would use that generic image to placate Bennett. She would show it to our parents to prove her scheme was functioning. She would grow incredibly sloppy regarding her own impending theft because she believed I was a compliant, willing participant in my own erasure. She did not know I had erected an impenetrable fortress around my actual medical reality. She did not realize the true sonograms, the blood panels, and the delivery schedules were locked behind a biometric wall she could never breach. I had secured the asset, and I had neutralized her immediate panic. However, managing the logistics of the fraud required Savannah to operate on multiple fronts. She possessed the fake sonogram to satisfy her husband, but she still needed to control the broader narrative. The extended family resided in close proximity. Aunts, cousins, and family friends would inevitably ask questions regarding my pregnancy. They would wonder why the supposed surrogate was never invited to family gatherings, or why Savannah was acting so unusually distant from her own sister. A single glossy photograph could not insulate her from the scrutiny of a dozen gossiping relatives. To protect the core of her deception, Savannah needed to construct a perimeter of lies around my character. She needed to explain my isolation by painting me as the villain. The strategy of containment was about to transition into a strategy of character assassination. The Whisper campaign was gathering momentum, and the dramatic irony of her impending social performance was about to saturate the entire network. A successful deception requires multi-tiered narrative management. My sister secured the generic sonogram image, placating her absentee husband with fraudulent visual data. That single glossy paper temporarily satisfied Bennett, insulating her from his immediate financial scrutiny. However, managing a spouse represents only one sector of the operational grid. Savannah needed to govern the extended familial network. Our relatives resided in close proximity, connected by a highly efficient gossip infrastructure. They would inevitably seek updates regarding my pregnancy. They would question my sudden, uncharacteristic isolation. A fraudster cannot allow curious spectators to examine a closed perimeter. They must provide a compelling fiction to explain the locked gates. Savannah recognized this vulnerability. She initiated a preemptive strike against my character, calculating that a discredited witness cannot testify. The strategy materialized on a freezing Tuesday evening. I sat in my home office reviewing a compliance matrix for a regional oncology wing. The temperature outside had dropped significantly, coating the coastal Maine landscape in a brittle, crystalline frost. The insulated glass of my window held back the freezing wind, maintaining my workspace at a steady 68 degrees. A sharp, distinct chime emanated from my smartphone resting on the polished oak desk. I recognized the specific notification tone. I had assigned it to a select group of extended relatives who functioned as the primary broadcasting nodes for our family tree. I unlocked the device and opened the communication thread. The sender was my cousin Clara. Clara navigated social interactions with a thick layer of manufactured sympathy, weaponizing concern to extract private intelligence. The text message illuminated the screen, presenting a masterclass in secondary manipulation. Eliana, the message read, "I am so worried about you. Savannah shared the difficult news regarding your mental health. Please do not let your prenatal depression isolate you from the people who love you. We understand you are struggling, but threatening to keep Savannah baby out of spite is only hurting yourself. Let us help you through this dark period." I processed the vocabulary. The architecture of my Sister Whisper campaign stood fully exposed. She had diagnosed me with severe psychological instability. By labeling me depressed and spiteful, she achieved two critical tactical objectives. First, she provided a highly convenient excuse for my lack of direct communication with the family. A woman suffering a mental breakdown naturally withdraws from social obligations. Second, and far more insidiously, she preemptively discredited any future statements I might make. If I attempted to expose the forged surrogacy contract or the embezzled trust funds, the relatives would simply nod with pity, attributing my factual disclosures to postpartum delusion. She was poisoning the well, ensuring no one would drink the water I offered. A novice encountering this level of character assassination would experience a severe spike in blood pressure. They would draft a furious multi-paragraph rebuttal, demanding a retraction and presenting evidence of their sanity. They would initiate a loud, chaotic defense. A data privacy auditor understands that defending yourself against a fabricated rumor only validates the underlying premise. Friction generates heat, and heat draws unwanted attention. I tapped the digital keyboard, drafting a concise, neutral reply. "I appreciate your concern, Clara. I am focusing entirely on my health and my upcoming delivery." I tapped the send icon. I watched the gray text bubbles slide up the screen, recording my unbothered acknowledgement. I then swiped left, archiving the entire conversation thread. The digital exchange vanished from my active inbox, securely stored in a designated evidentiary folder. I maintained my silence. While portraying me as an unstable villain in private text threads, Savannah simultaneously curated a radically different persona on her public platforms. She needed to project the image of a joyous, affluent mother to be to her wealthy peers. I monitored her digital footprint through a secondary, anonymous profile. Her recent uploads featured an exhaustive, highly staged documentation of her domestic preparations. The centerpiece of her online exhibition was the newly constructed nursery inside her coastal vacation home. The photographs displayed a room engineered for maximum aesthetic impact, devoid of any practical utility. The focal point was a handcrafted imported crib, carved from sustainable European beechwood. Surrounding the sleeping apparatus were plush, organic cotton textiles, a bespoke rocking chair upholstered in imported velvet, and a hand-painted mural depicting a serene woodland landscape. I analyzed the visible inventory, cross-referencing the designer labels with premium retail catalogs. The budget for that single room easily exceeded $10,000. She was financing this visual performance using the capital she had embezzled from Bennett Family Trust. Savannah posted these images with cloying, self-congratulatory captions. "Counting down the days until our little angel arrives," one caption read, followed by a string of glittering emojis. "We have prepared the perfect sanctuary for our growing family." The comment section overflowed with praise from her country club associates, applauding her exquisite taste and offering early congratulations. The dramatic irony saturating the digital feed was profound and intoxicating. Her audience offered their admiration, entirely ignorant of the stark clinical reality I had engineered. Savannah was proudly displaying a $10,000 sanctuary for an asset she would never acquire. She was accepting praise for a biological milestone she had fraudulently claimed. She believed she controlled the narrative, steering the entire family toward a triumphant, tearful handover in a hospital delivery room. She remained blissfully unaware of the ironclad, multi-tier privacy firewall I had erected around my medical identity. The woman curating this pristine aesthetic, boasting to her affluent peers about her impending motherhood, was legally barred from even crossing the threshold of my designated maternity ward. If she approached the reception desk, the institutional protocols would classify her as a hostile security threat. I did not report her posts. I did not leave anonymous mocking comments exposing her lies. I utilized a specialized software tool to capture high-resolution screenshots of every single upload. I preserved the timestamps, the captions, and the fawning responses from her network. I routed these digital files to the encrypted black presentation folder resting on my secure server. When you construct a trap, you allow the target to gather their own audience. You let them build their pedestal of lies as high as their vanity permits. The higher the elevation, the more devastating the inevitable kinetic impact when the supports are finally removed. The winter dragged forward, the frozen Maine landscape mirroring my unyielding internal focus. My physical dimension shifted the third trimester, imposing its heavy, unavoidable biological demands. The fatigue grew pronounced, and the mechanical aches of advanced gestation required careful management. I maintained my corporate auditing schedule, utilizing the regimented workflow to anchor my mind. The due date circled on my calendar was no longer a distant abstract concept. It was an impending, concrete deadline. The timeline was compressing rapidly, funneling all the isolated variables toward a singular, unavoidable convergence. Savannah continued to refine her illusions, her hubris expanding with every passing week. Helen and Richard continued their enabling silence, tethered to the secret coastal mortgage they had co-signed to facilitate the fraud. Bennett remained absent, traveling between commercial development sites, funding a deceptive reality he trusted without verification. They were all operating under the fatal assumption that my lifelong habit of logistical compliance would ultimately force my submission. They believed I would quietly surrender my daughter to preserve their fabricated infrastructure. They had no idea I was preparing to execute a decoy maneuver designed to draw them out of their fortified positions and lead them directly into the blinding light of an institutional audit. The final phase of the gestation cycle was ending, and the strategic deployment was about to commence. The biological timeline of human gestation does not adhere to preferred corporate scheduling. At exactly 38 weeks, the parameters of my physical reality shifted, signaling the inevitable conclusion of the incubation period. The transition initiated on a Thursday evening. It did not announce itself with sudden theatrical chaos. It began with a subtle tightening across my lower abdomen, a sharp, rhythmic pain that operated like a precise internal metronome. I sat on the edge of my living room sofa, tracking the intervals, utilizing the stopwatch application on my smartphone. A data privacy auditor treats physical discomfort as an incoming metric. Pain is simply a biological alert, indicating a system is preparing to execute a primary function. Nolan sat beside me, observing the data. As a meteorologist, he understood the mechanics of an approaching front. He recognized the shift in my breathing patterns and the rigid set of my posture. He did not panic or offer useless, frantic suggestions. He quietly retrieved the packed overnight bags from the hall closet and positioned them near the front door. We operated with the synchronized efficiency of two professionals managing a scheduled deployment. The contractions narrowed to a consistent 5-minute interval. The physiological window for remaining in the unmonitored environment of our home was rapidly closing. We stepped out into the freezing Maine night. The coastal winter had delivered a sudden, severe squall. Heavy precipitation drifted down from the blackened sky, coating the driveway in a thick layer of pristine white powder. Nolan secured my luggage in the rear cargo bay of his vehicle, while I navigated the icy walkway. I settled into the passenger seat, engaging the thermal heating coils beneath the leather upholstery. He started the engine and guided the car out of the suburban neighborhood. The drive to the Portland Medical Facility required 25 minutes under optimal conditions. The current weather system doubled the estimated transit time. I stared through the windshield, watching the blinding headlights of oncoming traffic illuminate the falling snow. The bright white beams sliced through the dark swirling flakes, creating a hypnotic, chaotic visual field. Inside the insulated cabin of the vehicle, the temperature remained a steady, comforting 70 degrees. The juxtaposition of the hostile external storm and the secure internal climate perfectly mirrored the broader operational reality. My family was currently racing toward me through a blizzard of their own making, entirely unaware of the fortified perimeter waiting at their destination. Before the frequency of the contractions escalated to a point where my cognitive focus might degrade, I needed to execute a critical tactical maneuver. A successful snare requires the prey to enter the designated zone of their own volition. If I vanished into the hospital without providing a breadcrumb, Savannah might hesitate. She might wait for official confirmation before initiating her extraction protocol. I needed her to mobilize tonight. I needed her to arrive while her hubris was peaking. I retrieved my device and opened the communication thread dedicated to my parents. I did not draft a lengthy emotional update. A decoy operation relies on sparse, unverified data. I utilized my thumb to type a brief generic message. Labor initiated. We are heading to the hospital now. I did not specify the name of the medical center. I intentionally omitted the designated floor, the room number, and the identity of the attending physician. I provided the fact of the event while withholding every actionable logistical detail. I pressed send. The gray text bubble registered on the screen, followed instantly by a read receipt. Helen and Richard were awake. They consumed the bait. I locked the screen and placed the phone inside my purse. The communication would function flawlessly. My mother would immediately forward that exact text message to her eldest daughter. Savannah would view the vague update not as a defensive measure, but as a symptom of my disorganized, frantic state. She would interpret the lack of specifics as an invitation to arrive and assume control of the narrative. As Nolan steered the vehicle onto the snow-covered interstate, I analyzed the structural foundation of my sister's impending failure. Savannah operated under an arrogant assumption born from decades of unchecked entitlement. She believed taking an infant from a maternity ward was functionally identical to stealing a middle school science fair project. In her mind, I was merely a temporary incubator serving a specialized purpose for her curated aesthetic. She expected to walk through the front doors of the facility, locate my suite, demand the child, and walk back out into the parking lot. She planned to forge the birth certificate paperwork later, utilizing the same corrupt boutique consultant who drafted her fraudulent surrogacy contract. Her confidence relied upon a profound ignorance of modern institutional realities. Savannah spent her days curating digital filters and managing superficial social media metrics. She knew nothing about the rigid, unyielding infrastructure of healthcare compliance. She assumed a hospital was a public hospitality venue where assertive, affluent guests could bully the staff into submission. She did not comprehend the legal weight of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. She possessed zero knowledge regarding biometric tracking algorithms or the strict access controls governing neonatal intensive care units. She believed her designer trench coat and her haughty demeanor constituted a master key to any locked door. She was traveling toward a medical fortress, expecting to find a porous, vulnerable tent. Her lifelong habit of harvesting my labor blinded her to the fact that my labor was now guarded by federal statutes. The vehicle exited the highway, navigating the slick municipal streets leading to the medical center. The towering brick facade of the hospital loomed against the dark sky, a beacon of clinical authority in the middle of the storm. Nolan bypassed the chaotic emergency intake lanes, directing the car toward the specialized women and children pavilion. He parked near the covered portico, shielding us from the relentless snowfall. We transitioned from the freezing exterior into the bright, sterile environment of the ground floor lobby. The air smelled of sharp antiseptic and floor wax, a clean chemical scent that signaled safety and order. A lone security guard monitored the entrance, standing behind a polished podium. I approached the reception desk, presenting my government-issued identification. The intake clerk, a woman wearing crisp blue scrubs, typed my name into the centralized registry. The standard digital interface immediately flashed a distinct warning overlay. The clerk paused her casual demeanor, vanishing, replaced by a sharp, focused professionalism. She recognized the high-security VIP patient profile I established weeks prior. She looked up from her monitor, requiring the secondary authentication sequence. I leaned forward and delivered the verbal passphrase. The specific alphanumeric code confirmed my identity and validated the strict exclusion mandates attached to my file. The clerk nodded, verifying the authorization. She bypassed the standard waiting room protocols and summoned a specialized orderly to escort us directly to the secured upper levels. We entered a dedicated elevator, ascending away from the public areas of the building. The doors parted on the third floor, revealing a quiet, brightly illuminated corridor. We walked toward the entrance of the labor and delivery wing. The corridor terminated at a set of heavy, reinforced double doors. A prominent sign mounted on the wall declared the area a restricted access zone. A glowing red optical scanner rested beside the frame. The orderly swiped his authorized badge against the reader. The magnetic locks disengaged, allowing us to step across the threshold. The moment Nolan and I cleared the entryway, the heavy doors swung shut behind us. The secure electronic click of the maternity ward doors locking into place echoed down the hallway. It was a crisp, definitive sound. It represented the physical manifestation of my digital firewall. The barrier was active. No unauthorized entity could pass through that threshold without triggering an immediate institutional response. The nursing staff guided me into a spacious private suite overlooking the snow-covered city. The room was primed for my arrival. Medical equipment hummed quietly in the corners, waiting to record the biological data of the impending delivery. A clear plastic bassinet rested near the window, positioned to receive the final asset. I changed into the provided hospital garments and settled onto the mattress. A nurse attached the fetal monitoring bands around my abdomen. The machine engaged, establishing a steady, rhythmic electronic pulse that verified the stable heart rate of my unborn daughter. Nolan arranged our luggage in the corner and pulled a chair close to the bedside. He surveyed the room, noting the secure windows and the single monitored exit. He offered a subtle, approving nod. The perimeter was locked, the environment was optimized. Outside the fortified walls of the medical center, the winter squall continued to blanket the region. Savannah, Bennett, Helen, and Richard were undoubtedly mobilizing, navigating the treacherous icy roads in a frantic rush to claim their stolen prize. They believed they were driving toward a glorious, triumphant handover. They assumed my vague text message signaled my submissive compliance. They had no idea they were racing toward a concrete barrier they lacked the clearance to breach. I closed my eyes, focusing my energy on the physiological task ahead. The final audit was no longer a theoretical projection. The stage was set, and the adversaries were eagerly marching into the snare. The physiological process of childbirth requires total surrender to biology. It is a profound, chaotic event that defies corporate scheduling or risk mitigation strategies. I delivered a healthy 7-pound daughter at 2:14 in the morning. The initial hours following her arrival were remarkably peaceful. The medical staff conducted their standard assessments, recording her vital statistics and ensuring her systemic stability. I held my child in the quiet, dim environment of the recovery suite. The rhythmic, steady rise and fall of her chest provided a new, flawless acoustic baseline. Nolan sat beside the bed, his presence functioning as a calm, unyielding anchor. The storm we had meticulously prepared for had not yet made landfall. The eye of the hurricane offered a brief, deceptive tranquility. The disruption commenced exactly 2 hours later. It did not originate inside my fortified room. It started at the primary access point of the labor and delivery wing. The heavy, reinforced double doors separating the secure ward from the public corridors served as the first point of contact for the incoming threat. I reconstructed the sequence of events, utilizing the detailed incident reports filed by the hospital security personnel and the first-hand accounts of the nursing staff on duty that night. Savannah arrived at the fourth-floor reception desk, projecting the manufactured frantic energy of an expectant mother racing against the clock. She wore a pristine designer trench coat, her hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. Helen and Richard flanked her, operating as her loyal, enabling lieutenants. Bennett trailed slightly behind the group, his posture reflecting an exhausted, bewildered confusion. Savannah approached the intake clerk. The clerk, a seasoned professional, accustomed to managing anxious relatives, offered a polite, practiced smile. My sister bypassed standard pleasantries. She leaned across the counter, her voice pitched to convey an urgent, breathless authority. "I am Savannah Blake," she announced, utilizing her married surname to establish immediate status. "I am here for my baby." The surrogate, Eliana Alexander, was admitted earlier this evening. I need to be taken to her room immediately. The infant is mine. She did not merely issue a verbal demand. She slapped a thick manila folder onto the polished surface of the reception desk. She extracted a heavy, cream-colored document and thrust it toward the clerk. It was the forged surrogacy contract, complete with the fake escrow details, the corrupt consultant agency header, and the stolen, scanned copy of my driver's license. She wielded the fabricated paperwork like a master key, assuming the sheer weight of the legal-looking text would instantly override any bureaucratic resistance. She expected the clerk to gasp in recognition, offer swift congratulations, and immediately buzz the heavy doors open, granting her unfettered access to her stolen prize. Savannah believed her curated aesthetic and her aggressive confidence constituted a VIP pass. She fundamentally misunderstood the environment she was attempting to infiltrate. A modern maternity ward does not operate on assumed authority or aggressive posturing. It operates on strict, verified data and unyielding federal compliance mandates. The intake clerk did not reach for the contract. She did not offer congratulations. She directed her attention to her dual monitor workstation. "I need to verify the patient roster, ma'am," the clerk stated, her tone shifting from polite hospitality to procedural neutrality. She typed my legal name into the centralized registry. The digital interface reacted instantly. The standard patient profile did not render. Instead, a glaring high-priority warning overlay dominated the screen. The system flagged my high-security VIP status. The screen displayed the rigid HIPAA exclusion manifest I had established weeks prior. The names of the hostile entities were explicitly listed in bright, undeniable red text. Savannah Blake, Helen Alexander, Richard Alexander. The clerk looked up from the monitor. Her professional demeanor hardened into a rigid, defensive posture. The squeak of her rubber-soled shoes against the linoleum flooring was the only sound as she shifted her weight, preparing to deliver the denial. "I am sorry, Mrs. Blake," the clerk said, her voice devoid of any accommodating warmth. "We have no patient by that name admitted to this facility. Furthermore, even if we did, your name is explicitly listed on a restricted access protocol. You are not authorized to be on this floor." The denial struck Savannah like physical impact. Her brain, accustomed to bending reality to fit her desires, struggled to process the rejection. She stared at the clerk, her mouth falling open. She pointed a manicured finger at the forged contract resting on the counter. "You are mistaken," Savannah hissed, her voice climbing an octave, the polished socialite facade cracking to reveal the panicked predator underneath. "Look at the paperwork. I am the intended parent. That is my biological child in there. You cannot keep a mother from her baby. Call the charge nurse. Call the hospital administrator. I demand access right now." The clerk did not flinch. She did not reach for the phone to summon an administrator. She reached beneath the counter and pressed a silent, immediate duress button, alerting the hospital security team to a volatile situation at the primary checkpoint. "I cannot verify any documentation you provide, ma'am," the clerk reiterated her tone, remaining flat and unyielding. "My system parameters are absolute. You need to leave the reception area immediately." Savannah's hubris collided violently with institutional data protocols. The realization that her fabricated reality held zero currency in this sterile, regulated environment triggered a massive echoing tantrum. She slammed her hand against the counter. The sharp, percussive smack reverberated down the quiet hallway. "This is illegal!" Savannah screamed, her voice tearing through the hushed atmosphere of the maternity ward. "You are holding my child hostage! I will sue this entire hospital. I will have your job for this." She snatched the forged contract from the counter, her fist clenching so tightly that the heavy paper crinkled audibly. The sound of the crushing document was a pathetic, synthetic noise, contrasting sharply with the gravity of her accusations. She waved the crumpled paper in the air, a frantic, desperate gesture of a woman realizing her weapon was entirely useless against a fortified steel wall. Helen rushed forward, attempting to intervene. She placed a trembling hand on Savannah's arm, trying to soothe her escalating hysteria. "Please, miss," Helen pleaded, turning her syrupy, manipulative tone toward the clerk. "There is simply a misunderstanding. My daughter is under immense stress. Just let us back there for 5 minutes. We just need to see the baby. We are family." "Family status does not override federal privacy laws, ma'am," the clerk responded, stepping further back from the counter. "The doors will remain locked." While Savannah shrieked and Helen pleaded, a critical shift was occurring on the periphery of the conflict. Bennett stood several feet away, observing the chaotic spectacle unfolding before him. He had rushed to the hospital, believing he was about to welcome his newborn child. He expected tears of joy, quiet congratulations, and the serene environment of a maternity suite. Instead, he was witnessing his wife launch a hysterical, unhinged assault against a medical professional. His confusion mounted rapidly, mutating into a cold, sickening apprehension. He watched the hospital staff treat Savannah not as a joyous new mother experiencing a bureaucratic delay, but as a hostile, unpredictable security threat. The tightening of Bennett's jaw was visible even from a distance. The muscles in his face corded as he processed the glaring discrepancies in the narrative he had been fed for 9 months. If this was a standard, legally binding surrogacy arrangement, why was the hospital treating his wife like a criminal trespasser? Why was her name explicitly flagged on a security system? Why was the supposed surrogate hiding behind impenetrable digital firewalls? Savannah's desperate, screaming insistence that the forged paper in her hand granted her ultimate authority began to sound less like righteous indignation and more like the frantic flailing of a cornered fraud. The foundation of her massive, year-long deception was sustaining heavy, visible structural damage right in front of the man financing her entire existence. The heavy, reinforced double doors remained firmly sealed. The biometric scanners glowed a steady, impassive red. The institutional perimeter held flawlessly, repelling the chaotic invasion and forcing the adversaries to confront the absolute limits of their entitlement. The physical breach was denied, but the siege was far from over. Denied direct access, the desperate entities would inevitably attempt to bypass the primary checkpoint, searching for a secondary, vulnerable entry point to extract their stolen asset. The quiet of the recovery suite offered a profound sensory baseline. The steady, rhythmic breathing of the newborn resting upon my chest provided a reliable, tactile anchor. Her tiny lungs expanded and contracted with flawless mechanical precision. I rested my hand against the soft cotton of her swaddle, registering the warmth of a new, uncontaminated life. Outside the thick wooden door of my suite, I knew the structural integrity of Savannah Deception was sustaining terminal damage. The biometric firewall held firm. The primary entry point remained impassable. A fortified perimeter deters a frontal assault. It forces a desperate adversary to abandon brute force and rely on social engineering. When institutional data protocols reject a fraudulent request, a parasite will inevitably search for a human vulnerability. The secondary breach did not involve a forged digital token or a physical altercation. It involved a manufactured emotional plea directed at a susceptible target. A soft, hesitant knock echoed from the hallway. It lacked the crisp, authoritative cadence of the attending physician or the charge nurse. The heavy door clicked open. A young man wearing green hospital scrubs stepped cautiously into the room. He was a transport orderly, likely tasked with relocating medical equipment or delivering meal trays. He possessed a naive, unsettled expression. He did not belong in a high-security patient suite. He glanced nervously at Nolan, who sat in the armchair tracking his every movement before looking toward the hospital bed. The young man held a small folded piece of paper in his hand. He cleared his throat, his posture radiating extreme discomfort. He explained that a woman in the reception lobby was crying uncontrollably. He stated she claimed to be my mother and begged him to deliver a vital message. She had convinced him that a simple bureaucratic error was keeping a grieving family apart. Helen had successfully located the weakest node in the hospital hierarchy. She bypassed the trained security personnel and targeted an inexperienced employee, leveraging her synthetic tears to secure a courier. Nolan stood up his meteorological instincts, registering the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. He intercepted the orderly extending his hand. The young man surrendered the folded paper, eager to retreat from the tension of the room. Nolan inspected the exterior of the note before handing it to me. He did not reprimand the orderly. Reprimanding a manipulated pawn yields zero operational intelligence. I unfolded the paper. It was a standard lined hospital notepad sheet, likely scavenged from a nurse station near the elevators. The visual data presented an immediate narrative. The text was written in blue ballpoint ink. The cursive script was hasty, frantic, and structurally uneven. It lacked the flowing, practiced elegance Helen usually employed for her country club correspondence. The erratic loops and harsh indentations mapped the profound panic governing her motor skills. I analyzed the written text. "Eliana, please," the message began, discarding any pretense of maternal warmth. "Savannah is falling apart. Bennett is asking questions we cannot answer. We know the surrogacy paperwork is not real. We know she lied to him." I paused, letting the ink settle into my cognitive ledger. My mother had just committed her complicity to paper. For months, she maintained a shield of plausible deniability, pretending she merely wanted to support Savannah's joyous journey to motherhood. Now, facing the immediate destruction of her financial tether, she abandoned the fiction. She explicitly confessed her knowledge of the fraud. I resumed reading. "But you have to understand what is at stake. If Bennett leaves her, the trust fund stops. Savannah cannot afford the mortgage on the coastal property. Your father and I co-signed that loan. If she defaults, the bank will take our house. We will lose everything. Just let the orderly bring the baby out to the hallway for 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes, Eliana. Let Savannah take one photograph holding the child so she can show Bennett and save her marriage. You have your whole life with this baby. Give your sister 5 minutes to save our family." I processed the staggering arithmetic of her demand. Helen did not view my daughter as a human being. She viewed my newborn as a prop, a temporary visual asset required to placate a wealthy investor. She acknowledged that Savannah was executing a severe identity theft-level deception, yet she demanded I participate in the crime. She ordered me to absorb the trauma of handing my child to a hostile entity simply to insulate her own retirement home from foreclosure. She prioritized a secret beach house and a fraudulent lifestyle over the fundamental safety of my infant. A novice might tear the paper into shreds, overwhelmed by the sheer cruelty of the parental betrayal. A vulnerable daughter might weep at the written proof that her mother valued a real estate portfolio above her own flesh and blood. I am a data privacy auditor. When an adversary hands you a signed written confession detailing a conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud and medical kidnapping, you do not destroy the document. You secure the evidence. You ensure the chain of custody remains pristine. I did not merely slide the hospital notepad paper into the black presentation folder resting on my tray table. Physical documents are subject to loss, theft, or environmental degradation. A secure audit requires immediate digital redundancy. I retrieved my smartphone from the bedside console. I opened the camera application, adjusting the focus to ensure the hasty cursive script rendered with crystal clarity. I captured a high-resolution photograph of the note, preserving the blue ink against the lined paper. I navigated to my encrypted email client. I did not draft a message to my parents. Sending a warning provides the target with time to formulate a defense. I targeted the individuals who possessed the institutional authority to act on the intelligence. I entered the designated email address for the hospital legal and risk management department. I then accessed my mental archive, retrieving the contact information for the senior partner at the fiduciary law firm representing Bennett Family Trust. I had mapped his legal representation months ago during my initial shadow audit of their finances. I attached the high-resolution image file to the draft. I typed a concise, factual subject line: documented admission of fraudulent surrogacy and security breach attempt. I left the body of the email blank. The attached artifact provided all the necessary context. The handwritten confession spoke for itself. I tapped the send icon. The application emitted a crisp digital swoosh, confirming the outgoing transmission. The data packet cleared the local network, routing the undeniable proof of their conspiracy directly into the inboxes of the hospital administrators and Bennett legal counsel. The parents' complicity was now a matter of formal, documented record before the climax of the evening even initiated. I set the smartphone down. The digital asset was deployed, creating an inescapable legal perimeter. I looked toward the hospital room door. The young orderly shifted his weight, glancing nervously toward the exit, hoping to return to the hallway and report his failure to the crying woman in the lobby. He took a step toward the threshold. Nolan moved with silent, fluid efficiency. The quiet meteorologist did not allow the courier to retreat. He stepped into the pathway, physically blocking the door. The time for passive observation was over. The institutional firewall had held, but the human element required a different type of enforcement. The young transport orderly stood frozen near the threshold of the recovery suite. He clutched his empty hands together, his gaze darting between my unbiding posture on the hospital bed and the quiet, imposing figure blocking his exit. Nolan did not move. He stood with his back to the heavy wooden door, his feet planted firmly on the sterile linoleum. The peacemaker was transitioning into the enforcer. For 3 years of our marriage, Nolan maintained a polite, measured distance from the toxic dynamics generated by my parents and my older sister. He attended the mandatory holiday dinners and the forced Sunday brunches. He listened to Savannah brag about her imported leather goods and her exclusive resort vacations. He watched Helen and Richard applaud her vanity while treating my corporate career as a mild embarrassment. He absorbed their condescension without offering a single word of protest or sparking a petty argument. My family interpreted his silence as weakness. They viewed his calm demeanor as a lack of spine. They categorized him as a passive entity they could easily manipulate or simply ignore. They failed to understand the foundational nature of his profession. Nolan operates as a senior meteorologist. His daily reality involves analyzing barometric drops, tracking volatile atmospheric pressure systems, and predicting the exact trajectory of severe weather events. A meteorologist does not yell at a gathering storm cloud. They do not argue with a shifting wind current. They observe the data, calculate the point of impact, and secure the perimeter before the first drop of rain hits the ground. Nolan had spent 36 months silently observing the unstable climate of the Alexander family. He knew a catastrophic collision was inevitable. He merely waited for the optimal moment to board up the windows. He reached out and took the folded hospital notepad paper from my hand. He scanned the frantic, uneven cursive script my mother had hastily scratched in blue ink. He read the explicit confession, detailing their knowledge of the fabricated surrogacy. He read the demand that I hand over my newborn daughter to serve as a temporary photographic prop to save Savannah's secret coastal mortgage. Nolan did not sigh. He did not shake his head in disgust. The muscles along his jaw tightened, corded with a sudden rigid tension. He looked at the orderly who was currently shrinking against the wall, desperate to escape the dense gravity of the room. "You may return to your assigned duties," Nolan stated. His voice was low, offering a calm dismissal that carried undeniable authority. "Inform the individuals in the lobby that their message was received, and the request is denied." The orderly nodded rapidly, slipping past Nolan the second the pathway cleared. He practically sprinted down the corridor, eager to distance himself from the impending fallout. Nolan turned his attention back to me. He offered a singular, reassuring look, a silent verification that our defensive perimeter was holding. "I will handle the exterior environment," he murmured. He stepped out of the suite. He did not pull the heavy wooden door shut. He left the barrier cracked open a fraction of an inch, creating a narrow acoustic channel that allowed me to monitor the engagement from the safety of my hospital bed. I leaned back against the pillows, my newborn daughter resting warm and secure against my chest. I listened to the shifting pressure in the hallway. Savannah, Helen, and Richard were congregated near the central nursing station, engaged in a tense, hushed debate regarding their next tactical maneuver. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of Savannah's designer heels pacing the floorboards echoed down the corridor. She was a predator denied her scheduled meal, growing frantic and unpredictable. Bennett stood several yards away from the familial huddle, his arms crossed over his chest, his silence speaking volumes about his deteriorating trust. Nolan approached their position. His footsteps were steady, lacking the frantic urgency that defined my sister's pacing. He stopped a few feet away from the group, establishing a firm physical barrier between their location and the hallway leading to my recovery suite. Savannah stopped pacing. She pivoted toward him, her trench coat rustling sharply. She expected to see the sympathetic orderly returning with my infant. Instead, she encountered my husband. "Where is the baby?" Savannah demanded, her tone, bypassing any pretense of polite inquiry. Her voice possessed a harsh, grating edge, fueled by the desperation of a woman realizing her timeline was expiring. "Tell Eliana to stop playing these ridiculous games. Bennett is waiting." Helen rushed forward, attempting to intervene before the friction ignited. She recognized the rigid, squared set of Nolan's shoulders. She saw the unyielding posture of a man who had reached his operational limit. She deployed her standard countermeasure, reaching for the syrupy, manipulative sweetness she utilized to bypass conflict. "Nolan, dear," Helen cooed, her voice trembling with synthetic warmth. "Please try to reason with her. You know how emotional women get after delivery. The hormones simply cloud their judgment. Savannah just needs a few moments with the child to finalize the paperwork. We are all family here." Nolan did not break his stance. He did not offer a polite, deferential nod. He looked directly at my mother, his expression devoid of the characteristic patience he usually afforded her. "The paperwork you reference is a forged document," Nolan stated. His voice did not echo down the hallway. It remained pitched at a cool, devastating register, forcing the adversaries to process the sheer gravity of his words. Eliana is not suffering from a hormonal imbalance. She is executing a precise security protocol to protect our daughter from a coordinated theft. The blunt, unvarnished classification of their actions struck the group like physical force. Calling the surrogacy a theft stripped away the elegant, aristocratic vocabulary they used to mask their greed. "How dare you speak to my mother that way?" Savannah hissed, taking a step toward him. She attempted to assert territorial dominance, relying on her curated, affluent aesthetic to intimidate the quiet meteorologist. "You are a guest in this family. You do not dictate the arrangements. Bring me my child." Nolan did not retreat. He held his ground, his physical presence acting as an impenetrable firewall. He shifted his gaze from Savannah back to Helen. He understood that my mother was the central enabler, the foundational support system that allowed my sister's delusions to thrive. "You assumed my wife would simply surrender her biology to preserve your financial stability," Nolan said, addressing Helen with clinical precision. "You assumed her lifelong habit of absorbing your chaos guaranteed her compliance today. You thought you could orchestrate a federal wire fraud scheme and use our infant to balance the ledger." Helen's mouth opened, a soft, pathetic gasp escaping her throat. The color drained from her face. She realized Nolan possessed the complete forensic map of their deception. He knew about the secret coastal mortgage. He knew about the embezzled trust fund capital. The protective shadows they operated within were suddenly flooded with harsh, undeniable light. "You thought you were in the clear," Nolan continued, delivering his professional assessment with chilling resonance. "You looked at Eliana's silence over the past 9 months and assumed you had successfully navigated the danger. But a hurricane looks peaceful in the eye right before the eye wall shreds the foundation." He paused, letting the meteorological metaphor settle over the sterile hallway. "The storm just hit," he finalized, "and you lack the structural integrity to survive it. Do not approach that room. Do not speak to the nursing staff. If you attempt to breach this corridor again, I will have hospital security escort you into the custody of the local police." The acoustic environment of the ward grew profoundly still. The only sound was the distant, rhythmic hum of a medical ventilation unit. Savannah's jaw tightened. She took a frustrated step backward. The rubber sole of her designer heel squeaked sharply against the polished linoleum. It was the auditory signature of a sudden, involuntary retreat. She looked at the quiet man standing before her. For years, she had dismissed him as a non-factor, a passive accessory attached to her useful younger sister. Now she recognized him as a terminal boundary. She could not bribe him. She could not guilt him. She could not utilize her manufactured tears to blur his vision. He was a solid, unyielding wall, standing between her and the asset she desperately required to maintain her opulent facade. Savannah shifted her gaze toward her husband. Bennett was staring at her, his eyes narrowed, processing the devastating implications of Nolan's statements. The forged document, the wire fraud, the theft. The narrative of the joyous, expectant mother was dissolving into the reality of a cornered, desperate fraudster. Bennett was connecting the data points, and Savannah knew her window for maintaining his trust was closing by the second. Brute force had failed. Parental manipulation had failed. The physical firewall was secure. Savannah realized she could not bypass Nolan using standard confrontation. If she wanted to extract the infant and salvage her collapsing marriage, she needed to circumvent the husband entirely. She needed a Trojan horse. Her manic, desperate eyes darted down the corridor, scanning the environment for a new vulnerability. She spotted a young resident physician emerging from a nearby supply closet, holding a clipboard and wearing a hospital identification badge. The physician looked tired, distracted, and entirely unaware of the hostile dynamics paralyzing the reception area. Savannah's posture shifted. The frantic anger smoothed out, replaced by the calculating, predatory focus of a woman preparing her final, most audacious maneuver. She could not break down the door, so she decided to trick the institution into opening it for her. The timeline was compressing, and the climax of the audit was rapidly approaching my threshold. The sterile environment of the recovery suite provided a necessary sanctuary while the external confrontation reached its boiling point. I remained seated in the elevated hospital bed, adjusting the crisp white sheets over my legs. The sharp scent of iodine and antiseptic hung in the cold, conditioned air, functioning as an olfactory reminder of the secure institutional perimeter. Overhead, a single fluorescent light tube emitted a low, steady buzzing sound. The electrical hum blended seamlessly with the rhythmic electronic pulse of the medical monitors, tracking my baseline vitals. My newborn daughter rested against my chest, swaddled in standard hospital cotton. Her breathing was deep and uninterrupted. I knew Nolan was standing in the corridor, acting as a physical firewall against my family. He had effectively neutralized their frontal assault, exposing the fraudulent nature of the surrogacy contract and dismantling my mother's manipulative pleas. However, an experienced auditor understands that securing a primary access point does not conclude the threat assessment. A desperate adversary denied direct entry will inevitably search for a secondary vulnerability. In the realm of data security, the most robust digital encryption can be bypassed if the hostile actor successfully manipulates the human element. Social engineering remains the most effective tool for infiltrating a fortified network. Savannah possessed zero knowledge of hospital information technology, but she possessed a lifetime of experience manipulating individuals to serve her aesthetic requirements. Through the thick, soundproofed door, I heard the muffled cadence of approaching footsteps. Savannah had realized she could not bully a meteorologist or bribe a seasoned intake clerk. She required an individual possessing the highest level of institutional access, but lacking the situational awareness to recognize a threat. She located her target in the form of a young resident physician. I pieced the mechanics of her infiltration together later. The resident was nearing the end of a grueling 36-hour rotation. Fatigue degrades cognitive processing, rendering an individual highly susceptible to manufactured urgency. Savannah intercepted him near a supply closet. She deployed her designer trench coat, her imported accessories, and her refined country club vocabulary to simulate immediate, unquestionable authority. She spun a frantic narrative, claiming a severe medical emergency was unfolding inside my specific suite. She insisted she was the intended mother in a complex surrogacy arrangement, and her surrogate was experiencing a sudden psychological crisis. The exhausted physician, prioritizing patient safety over administrative skepticism, allowed his training to be weaponized. He did not verify her identity against the high-security exclusion manifest. He simply reacted to the simulated panic. A sharp electronic chime echoed from the corridor. It was the distinct auditory signature of an authorized identification badge swiping against the proximity reader. The magnetic locks disengaged. The heavy wooden door swung inward, breaking the secure seal of my recovery suite. The resident physician stepped across the threshold first, his expression tight with clinical concern. He did not have the opportunity to assess the situation before the hostile entities flooded the room. Savannah pushed past him, utilizing his authorized entry to execute her ambush. She breached the perimeter, dragging her husband and our parents in her wake. The visual contrast between my sister and the clinical environment was jarring. The crisp rustle of her designer trench coat created a frantic, chaotic friction against the quiet hum of the medical machinery. Her carefully curated affluent facade was fracturing under the pressure of her impending ruin. Her eyes were wide, darting around the room with a desperate, manic intensity. She was a predator who had finally cornered her prey, only to discover the prey was holding a loaded weapon. Bennett followed her into the suite, his posture radiating profound, bewildered hesitation. He was a successful commercial developer, a man accustomed to reviewing verified blueprints and executed contracts. He operated in a world of logical transactions. He stepped into the maternity suite, expecting to find a legitimate surrogacy agency representative, a polite legal handover, and a joyous celebration of his new heir. Instead, he found a standard patient recovery room. He saw his sister-in-law resting in a hospital bed, holding an infant, displaying zero signs of a transactional arrangement. He watched the hospital staff treat his wife as an invading anomaly. His analytical mind struggled to reconcile the pristine narrative Savannah had spun for 9 months with the chaotic, illogical reality unfolding before his eyes. Helen and Richard lingered near the doorframe, serving as silent, terrified enforcers. They had co-signed the fraudulent coastal mortgage, tethering their own retirement to this elaborate deception. They looked at the biometric scanner mounted near the door and the formal patient chart secured to the foot of my bed. Their faces turned a sickly ashen gray. They realized the institutional protocols were insurmountable. The fraud was terminal. Savannah recognized that Bennett was rapidly processing the discrepancies. The optical illusion of her wealthy, untroubled motherhood was evaporating. She needed to reassert control over his perception before he demanded a forensic review of the paperwork. She could not allow him a moment of silent calculation. She leaned entirely into her delusion, pivoting to her final rehearsed script. She pointed a manicured, trembling finger directly at my chest. Her voice climbed an octave, shedding its polished frequency and adopting a harsh, grating pitch. "She is experiencing a postpartum delusion," Bennett, Savannah insisted, demanding his immediate compliance. "The hormones are making her confused. She thinks the child belongs to her." She utilized the very medical vulnerability she had invented during her smear campaign, attempting to brand me as an unstable incubator. She crafted a performance designed to elicit pity for herself and disgust for the woman she claimed was stealing her future. "Tell her to hand over our baby right now before she does something dangerous," Savannah commanded, turning her frantic gaze toward the resident physician who stood frozen by the doorway, realizing he had facilitated a severe security breach. She took a definitive step forward, closing the distance to my bedside. She reached her arms out, extending her hands toward the clear plastic bassinet resting near the window. She intended to bypass the negotiation entirely and establish physical possession of the asset. She believed that holding the infant would solidify her claim, forcing the hospital to respect her fabricated intended mother status. A standard patient enduring a home invasion inside a medical facility might shrink back against the pillows. A vulnerable woman might pull her child away or scream for hospital security to intervene. An emotional eruption provides the adversary with the exact friction they require to validate their claims of instability. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or alter my resting heart rate. Confrontation without leverage yields zero return on investment. A data privacy auditor does not react to an unauthorized access attempt with hysteria. You do not argue with a corrupted user who has bypassed the initial firewall. You simply trigger the ultimate verification sequence. I sat perfectly upright in the hospital bed, maintaining immaculate posture. Resting squarely on my lap was the sleek black presentation folder containing the printed shadow audit. Inside that dark leather cover sat the forged surrogacy contract, the municipal property deed for her secret beach house, and the routing numbers, proving she embezzled the trust fund disbursement. The undeniable documentation of her federal wire fraud remained secured under my hands, waiting for the optimal moment of deployment. First, I needed to neutralize the immediate physical threat. I reached over toward the bedside console. My fingers located the plastic housing of the nurse call system. I pressed the red button pinned to my pillowcase. A sharp, piercing beep echoed through the suite, overriding the frantic rustle of Savannah's trench coat. The electronic tone served as a definitive auditory gavel, striking through the noise of her theatrical delusion. The heavy door opened wider. The charge nurse stepped through the threshold, flanked by 2 uniformed hospital security officers. She scanned the crowded room, her trained eyes instantly assessing the friction. She noted the frantic posture of my sister, the confusion of the husband, and the presence of the manipulated resident physician. Savannah opened her mouth to launch into a secondary tirade to repeat her claims of intended parenthood and demand the removal of the uncooperative surrogate. I did not permit her the opportunity to speak. I bypassed my sister entirely. I looked directly at the charge nurse, utilizing a calm, clinical tone devoid of any defensive heat. Please verify the biometric security protocol on the patient bracelet, I instructed. The convergence of the timeline was complete. Savannah had executed her ambush, relying on sheer hubris and a forged piece of paper. She believed her aesthetic superiority and her manufactured panic could override a federally regulated health system. She assumed she controlled the narrative in front of her wealthy husband. She was entirely ignorant of the unyielding digital infrastructure designed to protect this specific environment. The charge nurse nodded, her expression hardening into strict procedural compliance. She stepped toward the bed, unclipping a handheld optical scanner from her scrub pocket. The final phase of the audit was initiated. The aesthetic performance was over. The institution was about to read the undeniable biological data into the permanent record. The command hung in the chilled, conditioned air of the maternity suite. I did not raise my vocal register. I delivered the instruction with the flat, unyielding cadence of a project manager initiating a final systems check. The charge nurse did not hesitate. She operated under the strict institutional protocols I had established during my intake processing. She stepped fully into the room, followed immediately by two broad-shouldered hospital security officers wearing dark tactical uniforms. Their presence instantly altered the spatial dynamics of the suite. Savannah perceived the sudden influx of authority personnel, but her entitlement insulated her from the reality of their purpose. She assumed the security guards were summoned to assist her. She believed her expensive trench coat and her commanding posture automatically designated her as the victim in this scenario. She turned toward the charge nurse, waving the crumpled forged surrogacy contract in her fist. "Thank goodness you are here," Savannah announced, her voice vibrating with a frantic, manufactured urgency. "This woman is having a severe psychological episode. She is the surrogate, but her hormones are blinding her judgment. You need to remove her from the premises and hand my daughter over to me right now. I have the legal paperwork right here." She thrust the fabricated document toward the medical professional. Savannah expected the nurse to take the paper, examine the signatures, and instantly comply with her demands. She relied on the assumption that a loud, affluent woman holding a legal-looking document could bypass any bureaucratic hurdle. The charge nurse ignored the extended hand. She did not even glance at the heavy cream-colored stock paper. A modern healthcare facility does not operate on printed assertions or theatrical performances. It operates on encrypted, verified, biological data. "I require a secure perimeter," the nurse stated, addressing the two security officers. The guards moved with silent, synchronized efficiency. They stepped forward, creating a physical barrier between my hospital bed and the hostile entities crowding the room. They gently but firmly pushed Savannah backward, forcing her to retreat toward the doorframe, where Bennett and our parents stood frozen. Savannah let out an indignant gasp, her mouth opening in shock as the guards established the boundary. "You cannot do this," she hissed. "I am the intended mother. That is my baby." The charge nurse retrieved a specialized piece of equipment from the deep pocket of her sterile scrubs. It was a handheld optical scanner encased in durable gray plastic. She stepped up to the edge of my mattress. She did not offer me a comforting smile or a reassuring nod. We were conducting a clinical audit, and the procedure demanded total professional detachment. "Extend your right arm, please, Eliana," the nurse instructed. I complied, extending my wrist outward. Encircling my arm was a thick, white hospital identification band. Printed across the surface was a complex proprietary barcode. It was not a generic patient tracker. It was an algorithmic digital signature generated the moment my daughter drew her first breath. The nurse aimed the device, She engaged the trigger. A bright, precise red laser swept across the surface of the plastic band. The optical reader captured the data points, translating the vertical black lines into an encrypted sequence. The machine processed the input, analyzing the origin of the code. Now, the infant, the nurse requested. I shifted my posture slightly, offering unrestricted access to the clear plastic bassinet resting against my hip. My newborn daughter slept peacefully, her tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, rhythmic cadence. Secured around her small ankle was the corresponding identification bracelet. The nurse leaned forward and directed the scanner toward the child. The red laser illuminated the dark room, tracing the secondary barcode. The system architecture of the biometric upgrade required these two specific data points to interact. The software cross-referenced the sequence captured from my wrist against the sequence captured from the infant. The algorithm searched for a flawless, undeniable alignment. The tension in the suite grew profound. Savannah held her breath, her manicured fingernails digging into her palms. She stared at the handheld scanner, expecting a digital error. She believed her sheer willpower could somehow override a closed network security system. She assumed the machine would generate a blank reading or a system failure, granting her the opportunity to reassert her fraudulent claim. The hardware delivered the verdict. A sharp electronic beep echoed through the quiet room. The sound was crisp, definitive, and entirely devoid of ambiguity. The small display screen on the back of the scanner illuminated. A bright green confirmation light flashed, signaling a perfect algorithmic match. The biometric data aligned without a single microscopic discrepancy. The biological link was mathematically verified. The charge nurse lowered the scanner. She looked down at the digital output displayed on her terminal and then turned her attention to the silent captive audience standing near the doorway. The identity verification is successful, the nurse announced, her voice projecting clear, unvarnished institutional authority. She read the official secure data directly from the system registry, ensuring every individual in the room absorbed the facts. Mother Eliana Alexander, she paused, letting my name settle over the hostile group. Father Nolan Alexander. She looked directly at Savannah, whose eyes were currently wide and frantic. The nurse delivered the final fatal blow to the fabricated narrative. There is no surrogacy agency listed in this medical database, she stated. There are no secondary rights assigned to this patient profile. There is zero legal or biological documentation indicating any other party possesses a claim to this infant. The individuals in this bed are the sole, undisputed parents. The green confirmation light continued to glow on the scanner, serving as a silent digital witness to the truth. The structural collapse of Savannah-curated reality occurred in a matter of seconds. The realization of her profound, inescapable failure crashed over her. The arrogant, sharp angle of her jaw slackened. The frantic energy that propelled her into the room evaporated, leaving behind an empty, terrified shell. I watched the physiological response manifest on her features. The pale, sickly color drained entirely from her face, replacing her expensive cosmetic blush with the stark ash hue of a cornered fraud. Her eyes darted toward the security guards, toward the nurse, and finally toward the man standing a few feet away. Bennett had remained silent throughout the entire procedure. He was a successful commercial developer, a man whose entire career revolved around inspecting blueprints, verifying structural integrity, and executing binding contracts. He operated in a world governed by hard data. He had spent the last 9 months financing a luxury lifestyle based on the promise of a growing family. He had viewed the generic sonogram photos and trusted the tearful explanations. He stared at his wife. The biometric verification provided a panoramic view of her deception. The hospital did not make a clerical error. The digital scanner did not glitch. The truth was stark and unavoidable. The woman he married did not hire a surrogate. She did not experience a troubled fertility journey. She had orchestrated a staggering identity theft-level deception using her own sister as an unwitting prop. Bennett looked at the forged paper crushed in Savannah's fist. He looked at my parents, Helen and Richard, who were currently attempting to shrink into the shadows of the hallway, recognizing their own deep complicity. He looked at the biometric scanner resting in the nurse hand. The architecture of his marriage dissolved right in front of him. Savannah attempted to pivot. When a narcissist encounters undeniable proof of their lies, they rarely offer a confession. They double down on the delusion, searching for a new scapegoat. "There is a glitch in the system," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy, stripped of its former country club polish. "They input the data incorrectly. Bennett, you have to believe me. She hacked the hospital network. She is an auditor. She knows how to manipulate these systems to steal our baby." She reached out a trembling hand toward her husband, seeking his validation. She expected him to rally to her defense, to utilize his immense wealth to threaten the medical staff and secure her prize. She believed her tears could still purchase his loyalty. Bennett did not take her hand. He took a slow, deliberate step backward, creating a profound physical distance between himself and his wife. The confusion in his eyes hardened into a cold, sickening clarity. He was a man analyzing a ruined investment. He turned his gaze away from Savannah and looked directly at me. He bypassed the emotional hysteria and focused on the only individual in the room operating with logical precision. He saw me, sitting upright in the hospital bed, perfectly calm, holding the sleek black presentation folder on my lap. He processed the timeline. He processed the flawless security perimeter I had established. He realized I did not construct this trap on a whim. I had anticipated this exact ambush because I possessed intelligence he lacked. "If there is no surrogacy," Bennett asked, his voice low and dangerous, carrying the quiet threat of a man who realized his accounts had been compromised. "If this child belongs entirely to you, Eliana, what exactly did my family trust pay for?" The question hung in the sterile air, marking the transition from medical theft to financial ruin. Savannah let out a sharp, terrified gasp. Helen pressed a hand over her mouth, stifling a sob as the secret coastal mortgage hovered into view. The verification was complete. The biological asset was secure. The medical perimeter had successfully repelled the invasion. But the audit required a comprehensive accounting of all missing resources. I rested my fingertips against the dark leather cover of the presentation folder. I looked at Bennett, acknowledging his inquiry. The first ledger was closed. It was time to open the second. The sterile environment of the maternity suite provided an optimal acoustic setting for the presentation of the shadow audit. The low, steady hum of the medical ventilation system replaced the frantic, unearned authority Savannah had wielded mere moments prior. The biometric verification had successfully neutralized her primary attack vector. She could no longer claim ownership of the biological asset resting in the bassinet beside my bed. However, a data privacy auditor understands that stopping an active intrusion is only the first phase of incident response. You must expose the underlying motive and document the full scope of the compromised data. I did not allow the silence to stretch into an opportunity for negotiation or further denial. Bennett stood near the foot of my bed, a successful commercial developer demanding an accurate accounting of his depleted trust fund. I intended to provide a comprehensive ledger. I rested my hand against the dark leather cover of the black presentation folder resting upon my tray table. The material felt smooth and rigid beneath my fingertips. I flipped the cover open. The crisp, decisive sound of the heavy paper turning cut through the lingering tension in the room. I bypassed the initial pages detailing the unauthorized access attempts against my medical portal. I bypassed the generic sonogram image Savannah had used to placate her husband. I proceeded directly to the core financial irregularities. I extracted the first document and held it outward. It was the printed copy of the gestational surrogacy agreement I had discovered on the shared family cloud server. I did not toss the paper. I handed it to Bennett with the clinical, unbothered precision of a colleague sharing an agenda during a board meeting. This is the instrument utilized to bypass your fiduciary managers. Bennett, I stated, maintaining my level conversational register. My voice lacked any trace of defensive heat or triumphant gloating. The document lists your wife and yourself as the intended parents, and it designates me as a compensated carrier. Bennett took the pages. His eyes scanned the header, registering the name of the boutique fertility consultant. He flipped to the final page, his gaze locking onto the authorization lines. He saw the high-resolution color scan of my stolen driver's license. He saw the frantic, unnatural blue ink tracing my name. The signature is a forgery. I continued clarifying the data points he was currently processing. Savannah stole my identification during a holiday visit. She utilized a corrupt vendor to establish a dummy escrow account, effectively blinding your trust administrators to the fraudulent nature of the arrangement. They reviewed the fabricated paperwork and authorized the release of capital based on a profound deception. A sharp, ragged intake of breath originated from the hallway. Helen. My mother leaned against the doorframe, her hands clutching her purse. She realized the scope of the exposure. The protective shadows they had operated within for 18 months were suddenly flooded with harsh, undeniable fluorescent light. Bennett did not speak. He continued staring at the forged signature, his jaw clenching tightly. He was a man accustomed to evaluating risk models and executing multi-million-dollar contracts. He understood the legal weight of the paper he held. He was holding physical proof of federal wire fraud and identity theft, orchestrated by the woman he married. But a forged contract merely establishes the mechanism of the theft. An audit requires a precise tracing of the extracted funds. I reached back into the presentation folder and retrieved the secondary packet of evidence. I handed him the municipal property records I had secured from the coastal registry. The crisp slap of the printed bank records hitting the plastic tray table echoed sharply as I separated the relevant pages. Savannah did not require $150,000 to purchase baby apparel or decorate a nursery, I explained, providing the narrative context for the municipal data. She required a massive influx of untraceable liquidity to purchase a specific asset outside the purview of your marriage. Bennett examined the property deed. The stark black ink listed Savannah as the sole exclusive owner of a luxury coastal vacation home in southern Maine. His name, his holding companies, and his personal trusts were entirely absent from the legal instrument. She embezzled the medical disbursement. I stated the words falling with cold, mathematical certainty. She extracted the capital from the dummy escrow and utilized the stolen cash to secure the substantial down payment on that secret beachfront property. She used my medical data to steal your money. The declaration hung in the chilled air of the recovery suite. Savannah let out a pathetic, breathless whimper. The color had not returned to her face. She remained a pale, terrified shell, stripped of her arrogance and her curated, affluent facade. She looked at her husband, her eyes pleading for a reprieve, a sudden burst of irrational loyalty that would shield her from the consequences of her greed. Bennett did not offer a reprieve. He lowered the printed documents. He did not yell. He did not throw the forged contract across the room or launch into a bitter, emotional tirade. He reacted with the cold, ruthless efficiency of an investor liquidating a toxic portfolio. He reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored jacket and withdrew his smartphone. He did not hesitate. He did not offer Savannah an opportunity to explain or justify her actions. He unlocked the screen and navigated to his contact directory. He selected a specific listing and initiated a voice call. He did not place the device against his ear. He pressed the speakerphone icon, ensuring the entire room became an active participant in the communication. The dial tone echoed loudly in the quiet space, a sustained electronic hum that signaled the impending activation of the final trap. Savannah's eyes widened in horror. She recognized the sequence. She understood exactly who her husband was calling, and she knew she possessed zero leverage to halt the transmission. The line connected after 2 rings. A polished, professional voice answered the call. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling. This is the emergency after-hours line for the Fiduciary Trust. How may I assist you tonight?" Bennett did not waste time with introductory pleasantries. He delivered his instructions with the precision of a man executing a targeted strike. "Execute a total financial quarantine on all accounts linked to Savannah Sterling," Bennett commanded. His voice was hard, unyielding, and completely devoid of affection. "I am initiating an immediate freeze on all joint checking ledgers, shared credit lines, and authorized user profiles. Revoke her access to the primary trust disbursements. Cancel every piece of plastic bearing her name." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, the sound of rapid keystrokes indicating the immediate compliance of the wealth manager. "Understood, Mr. Sterling. I am initiating the lockdown protocol now. All secondary access points are being disabled. The primary cards will decline at any point of sale. Make it effective immediately," Bennett finalized. "I will contact the legal department in the morning to begin the forensic review." He terminated the call. The dial tone vanished, replaced by a profound, suffocating silence. The architectural foundation of Savannah's curated reality disintegrated in less than 60 seconds. The luxury vehicles, the imported designer apparel, the exclusive country club brunches, and the meticulously decorated $10,000 nursery were all funded by the specific accounts Bennett had just frozen. The life she had stolen my medical data to protect was now permanently inaccessible. She was a bankrupt civilian standing in a hospital room entirely cut off from her supply lines. Savannah broke. The polished socialite facade shattered completely. She let out a raw, hysterical scream, a sound of total, unadulterated defeat that tore through the sterile atmosphere of the maternity ward. Bennett did not look at her. He turned his back on the screaming woman, signaling the absolute termination of his investment. He turned toward the doorframe where Helen and Richard stood paralyzed. My parents had witnessed the entire execution of the audit. They heard the biometric verification. They heard the speakerphone call freezing Savannah's assets, and they knew the municipal mortgage details resting in the black folder contained their own signatures. Helen began to hyperventilate. Short, panicked gasps escaped her lips. She grasped her husband's arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. She realized the true scope of the collateral damage. If Savannah lost her access to Bennett's daily capital, she would instantly default on the secret coastal mortgage. The lending institution would bypass Savannah and target the guarantors. The bank would foreclose on my parents' retirement home to cover the deficit. They had co-signed the fraud. They were financially tethered to the crime. And Bennett, holding the undeniable proof of their complicity, was preparing to walk out of the room. The audit was complete. The data was exposed. The only remaining action was the physical extraction of the corrupted entities from the secure perimeter. I watched the hospital security officers execute their mandated directives. They moved with coordinated, silent precision, a testament to the rigorous protocols governing the facility. Savannah offered zero physical resistance. The realization of her frozen financial assets paralyzed her motor functions. She stood in the center of the recovery suite, staring at the blank screen of her smartphone as if the device might magically reconnect her to Bennett wealth. The guards flanked her, placing firm hands on her shoulders, guiding her toward the threshold. Helen continued her shallow, panicked gasps. She reached out, grasping the wooden doorframe, refusing to process the eviction. The secondary officer detached her fingers from the casing, instructing her to walk. Richard followed, his head bowed, adopting the posture of a man who just recognized the terminal cost of a lifetime of passive compliance. They were marched down the corridor. The charge nurse utilized her administrative terminal to flag their profiles, permanently banning them from the regional healthcare network. They were escorted into the service elevator and deposited onto the freezing pavement outside the main entrance. They could never cross the perimeter of this institution again. Bennett remained in the room for 1 additional minute. He held the black presentation folder against his side. The document represented the death of his marriage and the birth of his litigation strategy. He looked at me, offering a single, curt nod of acknowledgement. He did not apologize for his wife's behavior. A seasoned investor does not apologize for a bad asset. They simply write off the loss and initiate recovery protocols. He turned and exited the suite, walking with the swift, focused stride of a man preparing to deploy an army of corporate attorneys. The heavy suite door swung shut, sealing the room. The chaotic friction of the last hour dissipated, replaced by the low, steady hum of the medical monitors. I leaned back against the pillows. Nolan stepped forward, resting his hand on my shoulder. We looked down at the clear plastic bassinet. The soft, rhythmic breathing of our newborn daughter provided the only acoustic baseline we required. The perimeter was secure. The intruders were purged. The ensuing weeks unfolded with swift, surgical efficiency. The legal machinery initiated by Bennett operated exactly as my risk models predicted. He filed for divorce the following morning, citing irreconcilable differences and acute financial fraud. His legal team did not bother with mediation. They launched an immediate civil litigation campaign to recover the embezzled trust fund capital. Savannah lacked the resources to mount a defense. Her credit accounts remained frozen. The designer vehicles were repossessed. Without Bennett capital to sustain her, the facade of her pristine, affluent lifestyle crumbled into dust. The civil court granted Bennett an expedited judgment. His attorneys seized the secret luxury coastal vacation home, liquidating the property to recover the stolen medical disbursements. Savannah was evicted from the very asset she sacrificed my privacy to obtain. She was forced to relocate to a cheap, cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city, stripped of her designer aesthetics and her unearned status. The civil litigation process generated a permanent, searchable public record of the embezzlement. Savannah's name became synonymous with corporate wire fraud within the local development community, ensuring she could never secure a loan or a lease without facing insurmountable institutional skepticism. She attempted to solicit financial bailouts from extended relatives, but the verified documentation provided in the divorce filings functioned as an impenetrable shield. The family network read the court summaries and immediately severed contact. The poetic justice extended directly to the architects of her entitlement. Helen and Richard had co-signed the mortgage on the coastal property, tying their own survival to their daughter's deception. When Savannah's marriage imploded and the trust halted her allowance, the mortgage defaulted. The lending institution initiated their collection protocols, bypassing Savannah and targeting the guarantors. The bank moved to foreclose on my parents' retirement home. They lacked the liquid capital to cover the remaining deficit. The equity they had spent decades accumulating vanished, swallowed by the black hole of their golden child greed. They lost their residence. They lost their social standing. The neighbors who used to attend their garden parties watched from behind drawn curtains as the bank authorized a public auction of the property. They were forced to pack their belongings into rented boxes and vacate the premises, transitioning into a reality defined by profound, inescapable debt. They had demanded I surrender my child to save their roof. Instead, their complicity in the fraud guaranteed they lost their shelter entirely. Helen and Richard experienced a similar exile. The society friends they had spent decades cultivating abandoned them the moment the foreclosure notices became public knowledge. They were reduced to relying on the meager Social Security disbursements they previously mocked as inadequate. Their enabling behavior yielded a negative return on investment, leaving them isolated in a cramped rental unit far from the coastal luxury they tried to steal. I did not intervene. I did not offer a financial subsidy. A data privacy auditor does not supply resources to corrupted nodes. I monitored the public filings from afar, treating their bankruptcy as a resolved line item on a closed ledger. Nolan and I returned to our home on the Maine coast. The winter storm had passed, leaving behind a clear, sharp sky. Nolan analyzed the barometric pressure, noting the stabilization of the atmosphere. The hurricane had shredded the false foundation of my extended family, leaving our sturdy, authentic structure standing untouched. I returned to my corporate office at the healthcare network following my maternity leave. I sat at my dual monitor workstation, verifying compliance codes and locking down vulnerabilities across the regional database. The environment remained crisp, regulated, and immune to emotional manipulation. I did not rely on hope to maintain our personal safety. I relied on upgraded infrastructure. I contacted a specialized vendor to enhance the physical security of our coastal property. They installed biometric deadbolts and high-definition surveillance optics around the perimeter. Standing in my front hallway, I closed the heavy oak door. I engaged the lock. The heavy, satisfying click of the deadbolt echoing in the quiet space provided a tactile confirmation of our isolation. I walked into the nursery, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of my daughter sleeping in her crib. Many individuals believe that preserving familial bonds requires endless compromise. They absorb the toxic behavior of their relatives, assuming that maintaining the network is worth the constant security breaches. They allow entitled users to siphon their energy, their data, and their peace. A seasoned auditor understands the fatal flaw in that logic. You cannot patch a system that is inherently designed to exploit you. True peace does not come from negotiating with hostile entities or hiding your assets to avoid detection. True peace comes from trusting the verified data inspecting the ledger, without sentimentality, and recognizing when an investment is bankrupt. It comes from having the discipline to initiate a hard reset and permanently deleting corrupted users from your network. Secure your parameters, audit your perimeters, and I will see you in the next deployment.